us for the City Council workshop meeting for May 27th. May we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Or that.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. I call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, can you please call the first item?
Approve the minutes of the regular meeting, May 20th, 2025.
Are there any corrections to those minutes? I see none. I move to approve the regular meeting minutes for May 20th, 2025.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 7-0. Madam Clerk, please call the next item.
Public agenda. The public agenda, I'm sorry, I forgot to bring the public agenda. No action will be taken relative to the items on the agenda other than the referral to the city manager for information. Requests will be placed on the agenda on a first-come, first-served basis. Each speaker will be allowed 5 minutes to speak. There will be a timer on the wall displaying the amount of time. There will be allowed up to 5 speakers. We do not have any scheduled public agenda members this morning.
Would anyone in the audience like to address the council? I see none. We will move on from public agenda. Madam Clerk, please call the next item.
Consent agenda items 1 through 31.
Council members, are there any items to be pulled for further discussion? I have one. Consent agenda item number 16. It's both 16 and 17. It's the same, similar item. It's the Homeless Care Coordination Team.
Excuse me, Mayor, before we get to that one, did you want to make the motion to approve the other items?
I will. I just wanted to see if there's any other items. So 16 and 17 I am pulling, but I'll discuss them as one item and then pass them individually. I see none others, so I will move to approve the consent agenda without number 16 and 17.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 7-0. We'll go in numerical order, starting with item 16. I'd like to know if someone can explain how this homeless care coordination team is being run. This will now be funded by liquor tax sales. If we can have information regarding this team, please.
Sure. My name is Steve, for the record. I am the Assistant Director of the Department of Housing and Community Services. This is a project that has been ongoing and has been funded by liquor tax in the care coordination teams for about 3 years and 2 years. And this is a budget revision item to allow the care coordination team to add another person in order to complete the spending. The project is being managed by the Department of Housing and Community Services, and these individuals walk alongside our social work interns, our case managers, and our housing navigators in order to assist those who are experiencing homelessness to get housed.
How is this working in collaboration with the police department's homeless outreach team?
The Homeless Outreach Team is a member of our community's street outreach, part of our care coordination teams, part of our everything that we do working with those experiencing homelessness.
I have had a lot of questions from community members regarding our encampment ordinance as well as the challenge regarding homelessness. So I wanted to see how item number 16 and 17 both help individuals who are facing homelessness get connected to not just the sheltering services that the city has invested in, but also other opportunities for housing.
The care coordination teams in the Department of Housing and Community Services, they participate in coordinated street outreach. They participate in the Coalition to End Homelessness in Wichita, Sedgwick County. They go to case conferencing. They meet the individuals who are on the streets, who are in encampments, and identify housing resources for those individuals. Each care coordination team is made up of a housing navigator, who is a case manager, a social work intern, a peer recovery specialist, in order to properly identify and be able to engage and work with those individuals in identifying a housing resource.
Couple more questions. I know that earlier this year in January, there was a homeless point-in-time count. And last year, the number was 691. The year before that was 702. So there was a reduction in the number. When will we get the 2025 numbers?
Having been responsible for those numbers in the past, I can tell you historically, the numbers are difficult to calculate prior to HUD opening up the portal, which does its own math. So the numbers are sitting at the United Way of the Plains with the HMS administrator, and she is busy. The HMS administrator who took over for me is currently entering that data now. We expect that she's probably going to finalize that and submit it by June 13th, and then there is a period of time in which HUD has the right to accept, deny, or ask questions. So the United Way of the Plains may wait until after June 13th, and they may then again wait until they hear back from HUD that those numbers are accepted or not.
So there will be a delay then in numbers, because I know that in previous years, by June 1st, we would already know those numbers.
I believe last year we took a little bit of a risk and we published them early because we felt like we were solid with our numbers. And that was after we'd already submitted them to HUD, which did happen earlier last year. There was a delay in HUD opening the portal, and the deadline for entering the data is June 13th.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Welcome.
Any further questions for staff? I see none. We will now open it up for public comment. I see none. I'll bring it back to the bench. Before I move this item, I just want to make sure that, again, this coordination team has greater communication and collaboration with the police department's homeless outreach team as they are going out into community, interacting and interfacing with individuals facing homelessness. I will move to approve consent agenda item number 16.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 7-0. For item number 17, a lot of the questions I had already asked. And again, I know that this is an increase in the salary or the hourly pay for these individuals. Can you explain again what it was previously and what it is now?
The original contract suggested that they were to pay the peer recovery specialists $10.50 an hour. And there were 3 of them that they were to hire. And then over time, they were only able to give us 1 because they were unable to find additional peer recovery specialists. And this is by their story at that wage. So they believed that they would be able to increase to the 3 that they'd originally promised if they could increase the wage to $14 an hour. However, that required city council approval to make that change in the contract.
And Steve, these positions, since they are peer positions, these are individuals who have faced homelessness before. Can you tell us a little bit about the criteria of whom you're looking for?
Yes, we're specifically looking for individuals with lived experience, and that could be substance abuse, mental health, and homelessness, although they are often all 3. But specifically, the ability for somebody who has been in their shoes really assists in the engagement process with somebody out in the community in order to communicate them and convince them that housing is something they may actually want to pursue.
And can you also explain, this is a contract with the individuals across the street from the now called Second Light campus, is that correct?
Correct. This is a contract with Episcopal Services, DBA Breakthrough.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I see no further questions. We will now open it up for public comment. I see none. I'll bring it back. I will move to approve consent agenda item number 17.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 7-0. Madam Clerk, please call the next item.
Petitions for public improvements.
Good morning, Mayor, City Council members, Paul Gunzelman, Public Works and Utilities. For the record, I have one revised petition location for you this morning. Signatures on the petitions represent 100% of the improvement districts, and the petitions are valid per Kansas statute. Buffalo Pines Edition, located in District 2, on January 16th, 2024, the City Council approved paving improvements required for a new residential development. The developer has submitted revised petitions with revised budgets to meet current market conditions. And it is recommended that the City Council approve the revised petitions and budgets, adopt the amending resolutions, and authorize the necessary signatures. And as a reminder, these will be paid for by special assessment. With that, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Paul. Questions for staff? I have just one. If you go back to slide number 4, this revised budget now has increased by $250,000. Can you share if construction costs have continued to rise, obviously, but are you going to be seeing more of these revisions?
They have been rising, and this petition was, it's almost 18 months old now. I am planning to meet with the plating engineers here in the next few weeks to discuss some of these items, as we have seen, revised petitions come back, as well as some of the overestimates on the bids. So we are meeting with them to kind of get their thoughts on some things.
Thank you, Paul. I see no further questions for staff, and this does not get public comment, so I will move to approve the public improvements petitions.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 7-0. Madam Clerk, please call the next item.
Approve that pursuant to Section 204090, Councilmember Johnson's travel expenses as estimated on the travel authorization and expense form to attend the Multifamily Housing Conference in Dallas, Texas on October 21st through 24th, 2025, for the purpose of representing the City of Wichita, consistent with AR 3.1, be approved. Upon return from travel, actual expenses shall be reported to the Controller's Office.
I will just add that a couple of weeks ago, we asked staff to now put all travel, whether paid for by the city or paid for by another entity, to be put online. It is available on wichita.gov/citycouncil. I will approve the travel for Councilmember Johnson.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 7-0. Madam Clerk, please call the next item.
Approve that pursuant to Section 204090, Mayor Wu's travel expenses as estimated on the travel authorization and expense form to attend the City to City in Detroit, Michigan, October 7th through October 9th, 2025, for the purpose of representing the City of Wichita, consistent with AR 3.1, be approved. Upon return from travel, actual expenses shall be reported to the Controller's Office.
I will move to approve my travel.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 7-0. Madam Clerk, please call the next item.
Approve that pursuant to Section 204090, Councilmember Glasscock's travel expenses as estimated on the travel authorization and expense form to ascend City to City in Detroit, Michigan, October 7th through October 10th, 2025, for the purpose of representing the City of Wichita, consistent with AR 3.1, be approved. Upon return from travel, actual expenses shall be reported to the Controller's Office.
I move to approve Councilmember Glasscock's travel.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes 7-0. Madam Clerk, please call the next item.
Council member appointments and comments.
Do we have council member appointments or comments? I will begin with comments. I would like to ask staff, how many applications did we receive for the city manager consultant process?
Mayor, I don't know. I know that closed at 5 o'clock on Friday. I have not talked to HR this morning. We'll get that out to you.
Just so that everyone's on the same page, again, this is just for the consultant to help with the city manager selection process. Again, applications closed on Friday at 5 PM, and we will receive, as a council, how many applications were accepted. In addition, we will continue having discussion regarding how the selection process will work. There will be full community engagement over time. So again, I appreciate getting that update, or we will be getting that update soon. Any other comments from council members? I see none. I will move to adjourn this meeting.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Meeting adjourned, 7-0. City manager, you can begin the workshop now.
Thank you, Mayor. We have some items related to our budget recommendations for 2026 and 2027. We're at a very preliminary stage, but thought this was really an appropriate time to check in with the council on our progress and some issues that we are working through. First of all, what we'll do is we will share with you, and we've already sent it out and it's available to the public as well, the pillars and the goals and the work that's been done towards implementation of those. You'll notice in this document a difference from previous documents in that now there are tactics in order to achieve the strategies. So we'll go through that briefly with you. Be glad to answer any questions. Again, work in progress. We'll finalize it when we get to the budget, but hopefully it's reflective of your desires based on previous direction. After that, we'll then go through some budget reduction options. Council had instructed us to do 2 budgets. So we basically have a base budget, and then we have some targets for reductions based on a different scenario, which would limit our property tax revenue. We have some preliminary thoughts on not just what that looks like from a revenue and expenditure standpoint, but what it would take in order for us to be balanced in both cases. So we have some items for you to discuss and give us some direction on. Again, preliminary, so appreciate your thoughts before we go further in the budget process. And the last, based on your discussion during previous workshops, is a thought piece regarding a local sales tax. So there's a lot of information that is in the attached report, and then we'll summarize that for you in today's presentation. So a lot of moving pieces, and with that, Mayor, we're ready to get started.
Shanna, is it on the next slide? Okay, oh, great. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Goldtree from the Finance Department, and as the city manager mentioned, we're having a budget workshop today. And I will skip this slide with the overview because I think he did a great job of describing all of the outline for the presentation today. There's been a lot of strategic planning that's been ongoing this year. And this graphic here on slide 11, is, I think sometimes when we have these workshops every month, it's good to just provide a little context to where we've been so far and where we find ourselves in the process. So at this point, in 2025, there's been a lot of work that's happened to date, but at this point, the tactics have been drafted, and those are the materials you have, and then the next step is working towards the performance management framework and building the capacity in the organization for that, and that will be really illuminating perhaps for the budget process this year, but definitely for the budget process next year. At the workshop in April, we shared some pillars, goals, and strategies, and we also shared those at all 6 of the DAB meetings that we attended. I think we shared an example of 3 of them. And I felt that the feedback that we got at the DAB meetings, that those pillars, goals, and strategies resonated with the community, so I feel like that's a good sign of progress moving forward. Okay, so what these things, if you're new to this pillar, goal, strategy, tactic language, the pillars are the really high-level elements of our mission statement. There was a lot of work done on that early in the year, and the same is true of the goals. And then the strategies were shared last time, and then this time, we're diving into the tactics. And as you can imagine, there are 46 strategies, so every strategy has at least one tactic. So I think there's about 60 tactics, so there are a lot of them. And so there's a handout that has been distributed, and it includes the tactics, and a lot of them include time-bound elements to them. So this will happen in 2025, or that will happen in 2026, or by this point in the process, this will occur. And so they're pretty concrete. So I guess this would be the right time to go through those. Just starting, so it looks, I can see this one, starting on that page. So, for example, the first pillar that we have is the well-run city pillar. So the goals are over on the left side. And you'll also notice with the goals that there's some high-level outcome measures with each of them. On the well-run city, the goal 1.1, it's related to, that goal is really related to financial condition. So that outcome measure is related to fund balance. But then on some of the others, what we've done in that column is that the outcome measures are related to the community city survey. So for these high-level goals that we're using, feedback from the community to guide, to determine how that implementation is going. But as you go through each of the tactics, for example, the first one, all departments will inventory activities and determine their placement on the cost recovery pyramid by 2025. So we're getting into things at this point that are very concrete, very actionable, and time-bound. So should we go through all 60 of them? So I don't know if there's any particular goal or strategies that are of more interest than others, but we have a lot of these tactics.
I appreciate the work that the departments have done to get us to this point. Again, the tactics are extremely important because this is how we're going to implement your goals and your strategies. And we're open to any feedback you have. I didn't expect we'd have a real robust discussion over 60 tactics today. But if there are any that jump off the page, more than happy to visit about those. Also, more than happy on an ongoing basis to discuss those. I meet with all of you weekly and love to have any discussion on those items. And ultimately, we'll bring this back for your discussion as we start to finalize the budget. One thing that's important is that these tactics help shape the budget, and so your priorities are reflected. As we are drafting the budget recommendations, we're trying to give priority to these tactics and recognizing those that aren't necessarily in alignment with your strategic initiatives so far.
So, and as a reminder too, we have a workshop scheduled for June 25th. So in addition to feedback on an ongoing basis, or if that was your interest, we'd have an opportunity to really dig in then as well.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
I'll start off with, for tactics in particular, since these are very finite. I would like to see more MOUs written, and whether it's, for instance, MABCD MOUs, making sure that those are intact in place and everything has been documented. If there are any other MOUs that need to be created or really worked out, I encourage that in the tactics. The other is, since there are 60 of these tactics, can you just go over high level the pillars?
Sure.
And just I know not everyone in the
Yeah,
community might be able to see these documents.
Yeah, I
so-
think there's copies out in the hallway though, too. So, but if people aren't joining us online, yes, so the 5 pillars, the first is well-run city. And so that is related to financial management, human resources, technology, staff training. And so there's tactics here related to financial management, data governance, and community engagement, and public information, as well as supervisory training. And so the other thing too, I think the comment about MOUs is so germane, because a lot of these things that are in the tactics are things that are very interdepartmental and interdisciplinary. And they also really address things that are in the lower right-hand quadrant of the community survey. Nearly all of those topics, so crime prevention, economic development, homelessness services, affordable housing, they're not just the work of one department, right? So there is a lot of work here that will require MOUs and also potentially administrative ARs, administrative regulations as well. And then the next one, pillar number 2, is keep Wichita safe. So that one has a number of goals, and one of them that is related to partnering with residents in crime prevention, and has a lot of focus on reaching out to neighborhood groups and homeowners associations and DABs. And so there's tactics, and that would be on page 4 of the handout. So as an example, there's tactics there that are very concrete. So instead of it just being kind of a theoretical concept, that there are very concrete tactics about initiatives and community listening sessions and infographics. So those would be things to expect, to see what as those roll out during, over the course of the year. And then pillar number 3 is grow our economy, and that's another topic that's on our community surveys. Economic development is something that's of great interest to residents. So some of the concrete things on this one would be cultural arts as part of the economic growth in this pillar, and their strategies related to that. So they're looking at revamping the cultural funding program as part of the cultural arts strategy plan. So again, that's another thing. There would be a plan and city council action and something that you would see in the future. So if you don't think your meetings are interesting enough, there'll be even more, right? There's going to be a lot of activities that are generated by this. And build and maintain dependable infrastructure. That's another priority for the community. There's been a lot of work done in the Public Works and Utilities Department regarding asset condition and maintenance. And there's, if you remember back to the last budget workshop, so much of GO and LST funding is directed toward maintenance activities. But the tactic here that's very concrete is to bring in another asset class when it comes to asset condition, and that would be park and recreation assets. And that dovetails nicely with the Park Master Plan efforts that will be underway. And then I think the last pillar is living well. So an example there. So that has to do with safe neighborhoods, access to educational and recreational opportunities, literacy, and also that's where providing shelter for residents experiencing homelessness follows in the living well pillar. So one strategy that was mentioned last month and at the DAB was to work upstream to prevent homelessness by implementing workforce development and affordable housing initiatives. And a tactic there that would certainly come back to the city council is to review the zoning code to better align community goals and regulations. So that's something that would certainly result in city council action. So I think what's just, is that in the budget office, we are in contact with all departments, and we've been collecting all of this information. And I think that one thing that's been true of this process is that there's been a sort of reorienting of focus. And I think that sometimes the focus isn't drastically reoriented, but putting it all together into the strategic planning documents, the pillars and the strategies, and connecting people even more has been an interesting process. So I feel, I review budgets every month, which is an interesting thing that I do. I feel that, because our budget's reviewed and vice versa, I feel that when I review budgets, I can tell when organizations have cross-departmental efforts and things going on with the community. And I would say that I feel that the city of Wichita has always excelled at that, but this strategic plan the strategic planning effort really just takes those, that collaboration to the next level. So.
If I can build on Elizabeth's comments, especially those closing comments, I think what this document recognizes is the complexity of the issues that we are facing as a community, and that it's going to take different approaches and strategies in order for us to be effective. It's going to take partnerships, which goes back to the comments that Elizabeth and the mayor made. It's not just MOUs, but everything that we do to partner with agencies outside of our organization, as well as Elizabeth said, across departmental lines. It's going to take a lot more data-driven decision-making. It's going to require us to better utilize technology and to look at best practices and actually create best practices where necessary in order, again, for us to be able to really address these complex issues that we're facing. There are not a lot of simple issues that are outlined in your strategies, and then tactics are probably a little more finite because we're trying to implement those. But if you look through the work that the departments are suggesting be their priorities for this next year, there's some really exciting things, but probably more importantly, a lot of leveraging of resources in order to be able to accomplish desired outcomes. And that's the other thing that's exciting, is we're focusing on outcomes. And that has not always been the case in the past. And I think the staff has done a wonderful job of embracing that as this document's been put together.
I appreciate the work that not just the finance department did, but also inter-collaboration department conversations that have happened over the last few months. So I would like to highlight, I know that the pillars are, whether it's well-run city, safety, economy, infrastructure, and then living well. I would challenge and say that infrastructure, number 4, should actually be number 3, but this is just a personal opinion, because I know that we talk a lot about water, sewer, the streets, and that really is based off of our community survey. Streets is number 2 in terms of priority. First is crime, second is streets, which is infrastructure. So my challenge then would be with these pillars, I know that you're not taking them as priority 1 through 5, but I would challenge and say that that should be. I think that the community is expecting that we have a well-run city that would be managing the assets that we have. But then second and third really are safety and infrastructure. So can I ask how some of the tactics regarding economy, how they are not necessarily the city of Wichita, that's not really government. Can you explain some of the tactics and how you're working with really the private sector who should be driving economy?
Do you want?
That's a good point, Mayor, and one that's sometimes lost on folks when they're discussing the city's role in economic development. If you look at the pillar Grow Our Economy, the first strategy talks about a partnership with Greater Wichita Development, or Greater Wichita Partnership. And we also then are working with internally with Way to Work in terms of getting new partnerships and bringing people in from the outside. We also are working with others in the cultural arts in the community in order to get a more robust offering for our community, but also make it affordable for those who have income challenges. We have partnerships with USD 259 in Wichita State to prepare our youth for jobs in the community. And then Elizabeth has already talked about embracing a partnership with the building community on revision to our policies, our regulations governing construction and development. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea. A number of agencies are listed in that area. But again, we don't create jobs. We just try to provide an environment for the public, or for the private sector to be able to do that.
Yeah, this is such an interesting topic too. With the community survey, it's commissioned in communities across the country, and almost universally, the top two, the 1 and 2 will be different from place to place. The priorities, though, for residents are economic development, or economy, and safety. And so it's an interesting role. I think the staff's done a great job of pointing those things out where we can participate. I think too, just going back to all the work that I was involved in with ARPA for a number of years, that there were already things that were happening and that we provided support, or I don't know, we will have that much support in the future. It was a pretty considerable award. But that knowing that every player has a different role, and I think that's true of the homelessness work too. There's just so many different people who bring different skills and, I don't know, gifts is the right term, but we all bring different things to the table. So, but it is lots of interesting POCO conversations about this topic, because it does rise to the top, but it's not like infrastructure where it's really evident what we're supposed to be doing, paving streets and taking care of buildings and mowing parks and what have you. So,
Can I ask further, the collaborative effort to try to engage, because pillar number 3, grow our economy, has fewer tactics than the other more robust, like keeping the community safe. The engagement with partners like Greater Wichita Partnership, I think you mentioned the arts in here as well. Transportation is a function of the city of Wichita, but my question really is more about whom have you engaged outside of City Hall to talk about growing our economy?
Troy, you may want to talk about what we've done in the small business arena, because that's where council's resources have been targeted the last year, and we anticipate that will be continued going forward.
Yeah, so I'll expound on that a little bit, try to put it into a couple of different tranches, right? Obviously, we have large-scale economic development initiatives, right, about attracting and retaining business at a very large sort of macro scale. And that's where our community partners like Greater Wichita Partnership, Chamber of Commerce really come alongside, carry water in regards to the attraction and retention of large-scale, macro-scale business. They also come alongside us in helping identify opportunities to remove barriers as it relates to keeping, retaining, and attracting talent, right? The next sort of mid-level we have around sort of Main Street business, right? And supporting Main Street businesses. We know that small business is kind of the lifeblood of communities, and so we partner with communities or organizations like Wichita Independent Business Association, WIBA. We support Create Campaign. Again, even some of the groups like the Chamber also come alongside and help us identify where there's opportunity in sort of the Main Street business environment. We're also having really good conversations in sort of the incubator space, the accelerator and the incubator space, right? We went through the grant program with Nextus a year or so ago. You just heard about the success that Nextus had when we came alongside them and supported them in accelerating, businesses that have shown a product or a service that can be scaled, right? And so accelerator programs, that last sector is one we're really starting to dive into, and that's incubator space, right? So we've had really good conversations with Wichita State University, Barton School of Business, Center for Economic Development, Business Research, right? About how we come alongside and help support the incubator space, right? And not just incubating businesses for the sake of creating more businesses, right? But really trying to identify those holes in our community and in our region where we need to try and backfill a very specific type of business, right? And then being very intentional around how we can maybe develop and help incubate a business to fill some of those. You've heard a little bit about the scorecard, the Wichita scorecard, right? And so we're trying to be really intentional across the entire spectrum, not only of retaining and attracting business, retaining and attracting talent, but also all of those are contingent upon quality of life, which is kind of a whole pillar in and of itself, right? Roads, transportation, affordability, all of those kind of things. And that's where we're connecting not just within those businesses that are primarily tailored towards economic development and business and talent, but just improving the quality of life for Wichitans in general.
I would challenge and say that another piece that should be activated and really talked about is the talent of 18 and below. So working with USD 259 and the Future Ready centers. Future Ready already has advanced manufacturing at North High. Then you have healthcare down south, Harry and Oliver. And then IT is going to be the next one. I would challenge and say that that is where even some of our investment should go when it comes to growing the economy. It's talent and keeping these graduates that literally just graduated this month to stay in Wichita. So I would see that there's opportunity with USD 259. Next week, on Wednesday, we will have our first town hall that brings together the county, USD 259, and the city to just talk about some of these opportunities between the three of us, between the two of us. And I think that that should be part of the conversation too.
Yeah. Mayor, I think we recognize that. And Elizabeth, help me if, with a number. Is it about $3 million that we put into the two readiness centers with ARPA?
Yeah, that seems about.
About $3 million that we did previously, plus we are negotiating, or we have negotiated that agreement with WSU Tech for their facility out at Jabara, and the council gave a discount of about $1.6 million in order for that facility to be able to be built. So again, I think we do recognize that we need to grow our workforce, our available workforce, and those are ways that the council has, I think, prioritized that type of partnership.
I would also add, since you mentioned that, the biomedical campus itself also, maybe not USD 259 per se, but it is WSU, KU, and WSU Tech. So I see us having a more, another portion within this pillar talking about our collaboration with education. While we don't take care of education with property taxes do go to schools, separate entity, but they can be part of this pillar as well. So just a challenge that we should also talk about education. Thank you. Elizabeth, any further questions for staff?
Yeah, just one follow-up on that. Since the mayor brought it up, we also participated in Project Wichita with downtown, so we may follow up with them and see. One of the final committees, I believe, was talent retention. So it kind of does a lot of what the mayor was talking about, maybe just working to get updates on that. And they worked, I believe, with Dr. Utash as well, as we looked at trying to rearrange our education system here at all levels. So it might be a good refresher on that.
All right, ready to move on to the budget part? All right, I mean, it's all the budget part, but the part with the financials. So as we've promised you every month, we've promised that we'll come back the next month with a budget update, and that's what we've got here for you. We've made some modest revenue adjustments based on Q1 performance, and that first quarter report was presented to you earlier this month. Expenditure items, we continue to review them with department staff to make sure things are technically accurate. And overall, it appears that the forecasting risks are the same, and I will walk you through those, particularly for people joining us the first time. It's funny because I'll get emails or things that are like, it's, from other entities, or people say, oh, you're moving into budget season. I'm like, we had our first workshop in January. So it could be people are joining us for the first time if they think this is budget season too. We have an evergreen budget season, it seems like. So some of our forecasting risks in the budget are position vacancy rates. I went through and recently, we do this pretty regularly from month to month and look at how many vacancies we have compared to the prior year. Changes in economic conditions impact our budget outlook. Changes in monetary policy have an outsized impact on our interest earnings projection. Property tax growth rates, which we will receive that notice next month. And then higher than expected labor rates in 26 and 27. And this is an important variable to remember just because the general fund, so much of it is salaries and benefits. So it has an outsized impact on the general fund compared to other funds.
Elizabeth?
Yes.
How much does kind of the expected rates with tariffs factor into any of our spending here?
So that would probably, there would be two places where that would impact us. It could, well, really three. It could impact us when it comes to commodities costs, but just to keep in mind, commodities are a relatively small portion of the general fund for materials. It could impact us when it comes to contracts. And so that would be ongoing contracts that we have for things like maybe fertilizer at golf courses, or it could impact us when it comes to construction contracts. And you all would see, those larger contracts, you would see that starting to happen because Board of Bids happens every week. The other place where we would expect something like that to impact us, and that would be in sales tax collections. And there's a very short lag when it comes to sales tax collections. So we should be receiving a distribution this week, and that would be for activity that occurred in March. So those are so materials we purchase directly, contracts that we have with other businesses where the materials are part of the contract, and then revenue.
Okay, so have we looked at building that? Is that kind of built into the CIP? Just kind of any of the cost changes that we might expect? And then the second part of the question is, would we expect the sales tax revenue to be higher because of the tariffs, the new rates?
Yeah, so the first part of that, when it comes to the CIP, most likely what would happen, because this is all there's a lot of variability right now, right? And I think that we do best when we focus on things at the City of Wichita. Rather, if I had the skill set to be a macroeconomic predictor, I'd probably not be in this role anymore. Run into the same thing with like natural gas prices, for example. I mean, there's a lot of factors that play into that. If you were to start seeing project costs that came in above the engineer's estimate, what would most likely happen is that project budgets would be moved around, and that projects would be that weren't ready for design or weren't ready for bidding yet would be moved into the future. That's what we did during, there was a period of inflation, 2022, 2023 inflation, and that's what we did. And I would expect that would be our practice again. It could also be the case if something, maybe a project would be rebid, or if there weren't many bidders, or there's a number of different strategies, but just from a big picture perspective, that's most likely what would happen. And then you asked about sales tax. So we have a very broad sales tax when it comes to local sales tax in Kansas. It really just depends on consumer confidence and consumer spending, and whether people hold back on spending and maybe delay purchases. Maybe there was something that a bigger purchase, a family was planning on buying, and they're gonna delay that. Or if things are really more inelastic and it's something that needs to be purchased immediately. So I think it's really too soon to tell, but I think that there could also be the flip side. It could be happening with the March collections, which will get the distribution in May. It could be that people are buying things now that they were planning to buy later because they're afraid that prices will be going up for some maybe kind of things you don't buy every week, right? So some of those items. So I think it's too soon to tell, but the most important thing that we can do is monitor and to continue to adapt. And we have, as you all know, we have a proven track record doing that, so we'll just stay the course with that.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet. So when the budget was approved last year, there were a number of initiatives that were included, that came from the bench, and those were included in the 2025 adopted budget and are ongoing. And I just share these items with you for two reasons: to share that they've already been included in the budget, and to share that you won't see them again on the list of reduction concepts except for court staffing. So there was the item on your handout for court staffing is in addition to what was approved last year. There are some cases where concepts are presented to you and the entire amount that was included in the budget was not captured as savings for these ideas during in 2026 simply because an alternative was approved. And so when you see that the 2026 deficit is slightly higher, that's part of the reason why. So those were for, I think, facilities and street maintenance and also park maintenance, which should be on that list, but so much maintenance. So those are those three things. Some other updates since April 22nd, the SAFER grant local match adjustments, that has to do with the wage rate when the grant was approved and the wage rate currently. Our two big internal service funds that support our whole organization are the IT fund and the fleet fund, and adjustments to rates were made to those. And then we made some other expenditure adjustments across the general fund. On the revenue side, franchise fees were increased for 2025. That's another one like sales tax that we received the revenue relatively quickly after the activity occurs. And natural gas revenue for the first quarter is very high due to the winter weather, but that's not something that we can necessarily, predict or expect in the future. The sales tax base was changed, and interest earnings were reprojected due to the current environment. So here's what it looks like as a table. So what you'll see is with all of that in 2026, we projected a deficit of $1 million a month ago. It feels like more than a month ago. And now we're projecting a deficit of $2 million in May. But in 2027, it's pretty similar, and that's because if you see that SAFER position adjustment, that's a bigger, it doesn't impact 2027, just 25 and 26. So that's the reason why that would happen that way. So on to balancing the budget. Some handouts have been provided, and these list some scenarios, some ideas that were provided to us by department staff. At this point, the scenarios are of varied impact. Some of them have less impact internally and on residents. Some of them will have impact on us internally as staff and how we do our work. And then some of them have impact directly on residents in the community. So they're placed in order that way. And so reductions in areas, this might seem like a lot of ideas, but we received even more ideas from departments. So these items were considered with regard to the community survey priorities from residents. So quickly, the first one here is health insurance costs. Health insurance experience, so we're self-insured, as it mentions in the handout. Self-insurance experience, our expenditures have been less than projected. So we budget for rate increases of 6% a year, so those rate increases could be less in the future. So that's that one. So it would have no impact on them. It would have an impact on employees that rate increases would be less, but it wouldn't have an impact on the community or the organization. Likewise, finance department pays for all the postage for the organization, and people are just mailing less. So that's a place that could be reduced. Park uniforms, that was included in 2022 in the budget to standardize their uniforms and expenditures. We gave them some time to get the program implemented, and expenditures have been less than budgeted. So again, that would have no impact. And then the last one is some HR contractuals costs based on them evaluating their budget and where they have, pretty typically have underspending.
So could we touch on item 1 again?
Yes.
Is that expected savings, or is that something we would have to go and,
The savings have already occurred. Does that make sense?
yeah, okay,
So the experience last year, so at a point last year, the rates were set for this year. And so from that period, from the time the rates were set to now, the experience has been such that the rates for next year could be less of an increase than budgeted.
okay, so there's no impact to the percentage that employees would have to pay?
No, there's no
Okay.
plan changes here. That's something that I think I would consider in a lower, we don't have that concept. We talked about it last year, but that is, I think, referenced though in the tactics relative to benefits, like how benefits are structured. So that's a bigger conversation.
Okay, and have these savings been figured into the previous,
No.
previous slide here? No, okay.
No. So here we are with number 19, so -2 and -5.5. And so these get you closer, if you think of it as a number line, these get you closer to 0.
Okay, so these savings right here, that'd be roughly half of the deficit that we have for '26.
Well, 26 is 2 million, so yes.
Okay.
I'll ask that question as kind of a follow-up. So in the individual packet we have, I think page 1 said the modified assumptions or the strategic reevaluations are at 0.9. Is this the 0.9 we're talking about?
Yes,
Okay, so these are already taken in consideration, which helps get us to the net of 0 under
yes.
modified
These
assumptions.
are ways to get you to 0.
Okay, and these are already being implemented just in practice?
Well, these things with the health insurance rates, so the question here is, we budget, the budget right now, the one that's in the computer, right? It's 6% increases per year. And generally, somebody would come to you in the fall and set the rates based on experience. And what we're saying here is, are you all comfortable having a lower assumption in the budget projection than 6% based on experience? Because we think by the time we get to you this fall, that would be the case.
Okay, so these are assumptions. Number 2, specifically the postage cost, is that primarily, I would imagine, water bills being sent out to people? What,
Yeah,
water bills
no.
and court?
Good question.
Fees?
Yeah, so water pays for their mail directly.
Okay.
So this is everybody else, except for planning pays for theirs a lot. They have a lot of mailing requirements, so they have their own. But this is just here and there letters. And we recover it through our indirect cost allocation plan, so we're not as generous as we sound, but yes.
Okay.
People are just mailing less. When I have to find an envelope in the office, I'm like, where are the envelopes, right?
Thank you.
So, any other questions on this slide 22? All right. So, and this one, on page 3, there's more, we've split them into 2 slides. So, the total's on the next one. The first item is a concept provided by library. There are some things some formats that don't get used as much, and these are for newspapers and some audio collections that adults don't use as much. So this would be reducing those types of formats. The next one, also from the library, they're planning on doing a study starting in 2026 on technology. Once all of the new branches are opened, and looking at what computers get used, what types of, how many need distributed, and also looking at the self-checkout machines. So it would take some time to generate savings here because there might be contracts for some of the self-checkout machines, like you're under contract for a year for so many of them and what have you. So that's why that one takes a little bit longer. And the next one is, the library told us that their local history section is staffed with 3.5 positions, and that they would be able to shift staff to other areas. Instead, we program that in as a reduction to the budget, since we're attempting to reduce the budget. And so that's what the genealogy partnership is. So the library staff would be maintaining the collection, and then the genealogical partnership, they would be helping more with the customer service, like if people came in with a question about a person who had lived in Wichita or what have you. So those are 3 library items. The municipal court one is interesting. I think that you all have talked about this in the past some. The number of traffic citations is significantly lower than it has been in the past. And so this concept here is to reduce some more contractuals related to collections activity, because there's fewer citations, and also eliminating a position once the interface between the police and court systems is automated. But the other concept here is to reduce 1 courtroom based on activities. So that would result in the elimination of 3 positions. And again, this is savings for 2026. This is not savings immediately. This is something that would be transitioned to. So that's the concept there.
Mayor, if I can add a couple of items, a couple comments. Number 7, I just want to, this is a work in progress. And so there's some variations from what the department submitted to where we are right now with you, looking for feedback. We also need to refine these concepts with the departments. On number 7, the genealogy partnership, when that was discussed by the library, it was primarily to be able to free up additional resources for literacy programs. But what we've done and tried to get balanced is capture those positions, not move them into the literacy work, but instead to take that savings. Wanted you to know about that because that's an issue, it's a policy issue, and the enhanced literacy efforts are included in your strategic plan. So I wanted to highlight that. The second is in terms of reduced citations. The department had submitted a savings primarily due to some technology changes that have been made and some positions that could be eliminated or reduced in scope because of the technology. But this continued decline in citation activity caused us to also question whether or not we can support the courtrooms the way that they are right now. And so we're actually recommending a serious look at reducing, as Elizabeth said, 1 courtroom. But I wanted you to know about that as well. It's not fully vetted yet at this point, but I think we do have to recognize there are some workload issues that are associated with not having the kind of citation activity we have in the past.
Just speaking up on the literacy aspect, I do think that's one of the things that is very vital to the library system, especially moving forward. So I'd like to see if we can smooth that cut a little bit there and make sure that we're still trying to kind of get into, again, the biggest indication of a child's future is a 3rd grade literacy. So I think that is something that is very instrumental to our library system. So not saying we can't look at cuts or moving it around, it's just make sure that we keep that, kind of keep that peg in the board there too and try and accomplish that goal.
Bob, is that already being accounted for, though? What I'm understanding from what you just said regarding literacy is there's already budgeted items for literacy within the libraries. These are a savings of 3.5 individuals in libraries if we just did not do this part. You don't have to reallocate them to reading or literacy initiatives. There's already literacy initiatives that are happening, correct?
Mayor, that is correct. It's 1.5 positions, if I remember correctly, that represent the $100,000. I think the question probably is more about our ability to achieve what's in the strategic initiatives, and there are a couple of literacy and programs that would be above and beyond what we're currently doing to try to achieve your goals, and that's reflected in the tactics. So we would probably make less progress on that with this $100,000 being taken as savings.
I would just say ditto to Councilmember Hoheisel, support on that. And also, would reducing one courtroom impact anybody's right to a speedy trial? Would it make things longer or harder?
I'm going to let Dante and Nathan talk about that.
Good morning, Mayor and Council, and thank you for your question, Councilmember Johnson. I don't want to speak for Nathan because he's in the room, but the court does keep measures as far as time to disposition clearance rate. So as the manager talks about thoroughly reviewing the impact of potentially reducing a courtroom, that'll be a consideration. The other part of this is, in addition to case filings, court cases have gotten more complicated. We have competency hearings. With recent changes in state law, we have more tools available to us in regard to driver's license suspensions. So it's those sort of questions that have to be answered before any recommendation or decision is made in regard to a courtroom.
All right, are we ready for the next slide? Okay. And these are all in that same table. So the next one is reduced tree planting. And so the tree planting is currently budgeted at $225,000 a year. This reduction would probably not, in this time period, might not have as dramatic as an impact as it would have in the past due to drought restrictions. If those restrictions were to change, this is something that could be revisited, but it's really a reflection of those restrictions. The next one is related to athletics scheduling, and this has to do with the scheduling of athletics officials, referees. And so this would, their idea here is that Park and Rec, starting in '27, would optimize the way they're scheduling to save costs in referees. And then the last park one, and there's a pretty extensive write-up here. The city of Wichita has been mowing right-of-ways that are just adjacent to private property, and you can read more in the handout about that. The idea would be to discontinue that mowing starting in 2026, because if it's adjacent to private property, it's the private property owner's responsibility. And the planning department is proposing an application fee increase for 26 and then 27. And then number 13 connects directly to one of the tactics that I read earlier, which is a cost recovery study, and that would be implemented in 2027. And that would focus probably largely on licenses and permits.
Curious on the right-of-way mowing. About how many properties is that? Do we have any sort of ballpark estimate?
I don't know. Do we have some? Do you want to come forward, Gary, so they can hear you? Thankfully, our expert on right-of-way mowing is here. Gary.
Thank you. Gary Ferris, Park and Recreation. I do not have a specific number of properties that will be affected today. As we do the analysis to find the complete impact, that number will become apparent and will be shared.
Okay, yeah, I'm curious about that. I mean,
It's more than 10, probably less than 500.
okay, well, that's not as bad as in my head, so I appreciate that. We'll look at that number as you develop it more.
Thank you.
One other question on that, and it may end up costing money, but have we ever thought about in right-of-ways just having like creeping time? It only grows to be about 2 inches. You don't have to cut it. It just stays like that. So that just eliminates the need for any mowing of it at all.
Well, and these are the ones these aren't the right-of-ways that are the medians. These are the one, like, or on Kellogg, that's still our responsibility. These are the ones that are adjacent to private property.
Okay. I was thinking more of the medians, 'cause
Yeah,
that,
so that's a, yeah. And that's, we've been having some discussion too, is that there probably will be less expenditures for water in the park department due to drought restrictions, and do we take this time and those savings and look at different ways of different ways of having different, I guess they're called turf conversions.
Yeah.
So looking at those things, yeah.
Is that something we could plant like wildflowers on and kind of beautify it that way? That way it'd snuff it
Yeah.
out and require less maintenance?
Yeah, so I was the budget analyst for the park department for a long time, so I'm full of interesting stories. Apparently, there are situations where when they've done that, people come out and they say, don't worry, we mowed that for you. Does that make sense? So I think there's an educational component of it as well.
Okay,
So
thank you.
that we've switched over to that, and they're, and sometimes, and then getting there, it's a little scraggly. Once you get there, it looks good, but those are fun, always fun stories. Are you all ready to move on to the next group?
No.
Okay.
I just want to go on the record and say I am opposed to reducing the tree planting. I do realize that we're in a drought, but last year, I believe, is the first year that we planted more than we removed. And so while I think it's a short-term budget fix, I think it's irresponsible long-term to continue to keep on putting off tree planting. So I assume as we come out of this drought, I would like to keep that money allocated and do a lot of planting all at once if that's what the schedule looks like, depending on what happens with the drought. But I definitely think it's important to leave that money allocated. So thank you.
I agree with Councilmember Ballard, but I would also like to see how we can lower that cost by working with community partners as well. If that's something, if we can continue our partnership with ICT trees and whatnot, and maybe if they'd like to take some of that load off of us, so.
All right. Okay, are we ready now for the next one? Okay. So the next one, these are things that start to have an even greater impact on the community. The first item, number 14, would be to cap growth for the support of the cultural institutions at 2%. This would not impact all the cultural arts grants, as a clarification. Number 15 is eliminating kind of a mid-level position in the city manager's office, and duties would either be eliminated or reassigned. 16 would be to reduce the amount of public art in the CIP. You may be asking yourselves, well, how does that impact the general fund? Because they're different funds. But if we were to program in the CIP for future years, there could be a mill levy shift from the debt service fund to the general fund.
Quick question regarding a mill levy shift. That would only be like, if it's projected at 900,000, so it'd be like 1/5 of a mill of a shift, is that correct?
It is not very much. It is something along those lines. yeah.
So let's say we shift 1 mil from the CIP to the general fund. That frees up about $5 million in general fund operations. That would just deplete the CIP of $5 million. Would that be correct?
Roughly.
Yeah.
Roughly,
The
okay.
trick with if you have projects that you're not doing and identifying those savings makes that sort of a shift more tenable. The difficulty of doing a shift of that magnitude is that we have outstanding debt. So you'd really, if that were the direction, to go that direction and shift from the debt service fund to the general fund, it would need to be phased in as that debt were amortized, but we're amortized quickly over a 10-year period.
Or you'd be able to have another mechanism that could fund debt service projects,
Yes.
correct?
But-
More cash fund projects if we do that
Yeah.
shift over?
Right, we can,
you
and
could do
that's going to
that,
be
too.
part of the next discussion. But I think the takeaway is, without that additional revenue source, we really don't have much flexibility in 26 and 27 to take out of the CIP because of our existing debt service obligations and some projects that are already anticipated to be constructed.
So we won't.
We're
we
really
couldn't
tight
shift-
in those 2 years.
So we couldn't shift more than a fifth, or would be a fifth of a mil unless there was another mechanism.
Well, this was
transfer.
specific, right? Because
Yeah.
it was taking from 2% to 1%, the public art piece of the CIP. We'd have to look at what projects are available, especially in 27, if there's any delays short of having another revenue source. But I think it would be pretty tight.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see. Oh, neighborhood inspections, that's number 17. There had, over the past few years, budget has been added to this, to the MABCD and the general fund for abatements and demolitions. If you've been on the council long enough, you probably remember that there were a lot of year-end agenda budget adjustments related to MABCD. The budget was increased. Last year, for the first time in quite a while, they came in under budget for demolitions and abatements and what have you. So this concept would be a small curtailing of the budget for that area. The next item, number 18, the park department has already adjusted operating hours for the 25 season. Based on the last few years, they have data on what times of day, days of weeks that parks are, pools are used, and they've adjusted their hours. So this change here would be including what they've done in the budget. So, and then number 19 would be to discontinue animal control field operations starting in 27. This proposal came to us from the police department. We had to move around the number sum between the different tables, so, in the different years. Departments proposed ideas to us, and then we put everything all together. So I'll do my best here. This amount here represents the animal control division no longer providing field operations. So no field responses to neighborhood complaints, bites, and animal cruelty investigations. The shelter would just become a drop-off facility, but in this scenario, the shelter would still be operational.
Quick question about this. So what would be, let's say someone gets bit by a dog, would this just be a patrol officer answering that call instead of an animal service officer answering this call? Would it just be a field response?
Joe?
I think we have some staff from police.
I don't think animal control can afford to lose any personnel.
Councilwoman, I couldn't agree with you more. We had to offer something
Sure.
to give some options for budget cuts. And we looked at our core functions, what would not impact 911 emergency response, and we prioritized violent crime. We have been doing well in terms of violent crime. We don't want to go backward, but yes, this would require police officers to respond to these calls and conduct these investigations. And obviously, it wouldn't be done as well as it's being done now. So this is not a recommendation, this is simply an option.
Thank you.
That answers my question as well.
And I agree with Councilmember Ballard as well. Would this, under this scenario, this would mean county would pick up on pretty much all of animal services duties?
As we have this outlined, we would operate the shelter, so probably, no, it probably would be the emergency calls would be answered by the police department, but then we would continue to take animals into our facility.
So I have a follow-up question then. What are the conversations that have been had, or give me some history regarding Sedgwick County being part of animal control? I know that there are sometimes individuals that will find an animal not within city of limits of Wichita, but will bring an animal to the city limits, and then Wichitans will have to pay for that care. And so what are the MOUs we currently have with Sedgwick County or other entities outside of the county, in addition to how are we cost recovering that then?
Yeah, we do have some MOUs in place for the animal shelter. We receive some revenue. It's not a significant amount of revenue, but we do receive revenue for caring for animals that are brought to us from other agencies. There's quite a few, up until we've gotten to the list here, I think that there's a lot of things, like, for example, the cost recovery concept. That connects directly back to implementation of a tactic. We did get a lot of ideas from departments, and a lot of them connect to implementing tactics, and some of them don't. And I don't think that there's a tactic in the framework per se related to animal control, but, we present ideas and we get your feedback. And so just know that this is one of the concepts that's used to model a balanced budget in 2027. So if this were something that there weren't support for, that we would need to look for savings elsewhere. I guess that's just a neutral, budget, just from a neutral standpoint of being a person who puts the budget together.
Quick question. So fast forwarding 21, you don't have to move the slide, but 21 goes on and says discontinue shelter operations by 2027. And
Yes.
part of it talks about the impact measure on Sedgwick County opening and operating of animal service facility to service Sedgwick County area. How many municipalities, and I imagine this research was done when we looked at privatization of animal control previously, how many municipalities have animal service operations opposed to just county operations, just as a state?
Very few have their own operation in the county, that my recollection. I believe they have contracts with us, limited contracts, because they don't pick up many animals.
So or statewide, how many municipalities versus counties would have it?
We'd have to go back and look at the work that we did previously.
Like, does Lenexa have one, or is it a Johnson County shelter? That's really my question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And a lot of times in smaller organizations, the animal control, the field function is embedded into like a code enforcement function. Does that make sense? It's not a standalone animal control officer, but someone who wears many hats.
Does the county animal control, do they drop animals off at our shelter as well? Yes. Okay, so they're already pretty much using it just like a regular shelter. I'd love to explore consolidation on this one if county really wants to talk about it. But yeah, I think we need to have our officers out there, our animal control officers out there looking for stray dogs. I know we've gotten some positive momentum in my district as far as just keeping dangerous dogs off the street, so, yeah.
So just for feedback, I'm supportive of what Councilmember Hoheisel said, but I'm generally opposed to everything else. A lot of this impacts quality of life in a way that I think is really negative for the city, so I'm not supportive of those.
With the swimming pool hours, it's actually something that is affordable to many kids or families to do, and it's so seasonal that I think it's incredibly important. Not, my 15-year-old son is not going to want to go to the splash pad. So while those are great, I think the pools are incredibly important, and we made a huge investment in them recently, and I think that we should maybe try to look at other areas.
I do have a question with 18, though, because it looks like it's a modified assumption. It says that these changes have not been reflected in the budget, but that we're already implementing this now. So would it just be more in the modified assumption instead of a reduction because we're currently doing it?
That's correct. Councilmember, great point. I think I shared this information with you about a month ago. Reggie and his staff have right-sized the pool operations starting this year based on data they had for the last several years or last few years, to show that there are times where, I don't want to exaggerate, but we've almost had more staff members than we've had users. So what they're trying to do is put the staff in the hours where the public really wants to use the pools. And I think it was a really good business recommendation, and I don't think that there's a significant drop-off in terms of service levels for our users, especially our youth.
Could we-
And Reggie can talk about that if you'd like.
Could we also maybe move that to the modified assumptions then? Because it is a modified assumption rather than what would be listed as reduction of service levels if it's already being implemented? Would be my understanding.
Rick?
The manager mentioned that we did look at data for over the last several years, looking at usage at certain times of the day when we had more people in the pools and adjust the staffing levels to make sure we accommodate for that. So some areas, the evening swim time may have been moved to the weekend time frame where we had more users that are there. Part of it as well is with McAfee with this year, but having some of the Hyatt funds with free swim days that are offered there, it gives opportunities for young people to come there as well. So when we did that, we looked at our swim lessons and those things that we got with partnership with the American Red Cross and made sure we maintain those hours so that those safety measures that we're doing for learning to swim and things weren't impacted. And then evening time frames, we do still have the option for those who want to rent the facility, they can do that, and there's direct cost recovery for staff when they're there at that time.
Yeah, and it was pretty terrible weather yesterday, so I didn't look at the website for hours, but were the hours already posted on the website?
They are, everything's posted on there, and we didn't officially open yesterday just with the weather and the temperature, so we'll probably be in the same situation today as well.
Yeah. But yeah, if people are interested in knowing what is the impact of this, it'd be on the aquatics. I think you can just search for aquatics on our website.
And if you download our app and you have it, it sends out notification whenever there's any changes with the operating hours or when Splash Pads may open or close for maintenance as well, so that people will know ahead of time before they go to those locations.
And while you are up there, Reggie, a couple more questions, because I think this is a misnomer calling it a reduction. It's really a modification already. Last year, the swimming season actually ended early because of the drought. And so these are things that we need to take into account. And I think where Councilmember Glasscock is asking is, this is already a modification that has been happening since the 24 season and now again in the 25 season, again, due to the drought. I think instead of going all the way to Labor Day weekend, you ended the swimming season a little bit earlier because kids were already back in school. So these are really already modifications. They're not necessarily a reduction. It's just adjusting to what has been happening with supply and demand. So can you address why it's, or maybe it's more an Elizabeth question, why is that not in the modified assumptions instead of a reduction recommendation?
And just for clarification as well, the reduction in the time frame that we closed the pools earlier did start last year, and that's continuing again for this year with the drought restrictions. But the staffing levels and the adjusting hours is something that's being implemented this year. It wasn't last year.
Yeah, I would say as far as putting it in this table and not the modifications table, we can certainly, usually what we do after we present all these concepts is we get some more details for things that were maybe missing and then remove things or move them around. So we can certainly move that to a different table for the final version or the next version. So.
And again, thank you, Reggie, and your team, because again, you were adjusting to the drought, which stage 2 went into effect August of 2024, and immediately you guys were able to adjust so that, again, you were being considerate of the drought, but also kids were already back in school. And then second thing is you're thinking outside of reduction. It's really a modification. We're not closing swimming pools. It's just an adjustment to when there's actual demand. You mentioned sometimes evening didn't have as much demand, but there was definitely a demand on the weekend. So you see where staffing levels should actually go. So I'm appreciative that we're thinking more data-driven and the data showing, okay, well, not as many come here, but they do come during the weekend. So how do we staff there?
This is a good pause point here, Mayor. Any other comments? Because this would balance, what we gave you would balance the budget if we used our existing tax levy rate. So are there any other comments you want us to incorporate into our thought process as we come back to you? I'm hearing some reservations about tree planting, animal control operations, the literacy in the library. We're going to go back and look at the courts. Anything else that I'm missing?
Bob, I just want to highlight too, I'd like to have a further discussion about the public arts.
Public art.
I guess more specifically, outside of my general opposition, I definitely would like to not see MABCD touched because we pushed really hard to get more funding there, and we never know, depending on the year, when that demand may go up or not. I'm glad that they had some savings, but just some of the general complaints I just received over the weekend, just never know where that might go. Definitely supportive of keeping public art where it's at. I know in the manager's office, everyone in there is very important, and especially with us talking about the things that we are working to do in the community. So I'm not supportive of that. Cultural institutional growth, I'm supportive of keeping it where it's at. And pool hours, I appreciate the modified plan that Park and Rec is doing. Still hesitate because if demand increases on that and then we start getting pushes for more hours, if we've eliminated the ability for them to do so, that's a concern of mine as well. But I do agree with partnering or trying to work towards a potential partnership and having a conversation with Sedgwick County on animal control. So just wanted to be specific on each item.
So
Okay, so I'm not sure how I balance a budget, but the one thing I would ask are priorities. If you could give me a sense of priorities as we go forward, because we do have to find $2 million and $5.5 million. And I know there's going to be hard decisions that have to be made in order to get us there. Are there any, can you at least give me a sense of priorities as, you know, as I go forward here, what do I have to leave or reduce in a different way as I go forward?
Just on that chart, the reductions, MABCD was a priority.
Really in all of it, I guess, because there were comments in some other tables as well.
Okay, I'll make a list.
Do you want that list by this weekend, or?
So, Mr. Manager, I'm confirming that the only way to balance the budget with current existing mill levy would be to take these recommendations as presented, unless comparable recommendations can be presented from the council to supplement the list that's
Or you
provided.
challenge us and say, okay, 2 million of what you've offered is unacceptable, go back to the drawing board. That's what
figure
I'm
out where
looking,
another
I
2
don't
million
need you
can come
to try to come up with tangible projects or programs right now, but I do need to know what is untouchable in your mind or needs to be at a different level than what's being proposed.
Animal control is definitely a public safety issue as well as a humanity issue with the animals in the shelter. So unless we come up with a new strategy, again, maybe consolidation with county, I think the animal control aspect of this is something that should be of the highest priority for us.
It's interesting too, when I build the simulator every year, it has increases and decreases that are, 5, 10, 15% or less. Does that make sense? And a lot of these are kind of along those lines of trimming things, using prior year actuals, using data from other, non-financial data, but the animal control field operations is a deviation from that because it's not just reducing something or having slower response, it's discontinuing the activity. So, yeah.
You're still gaining feedback from all of us, and I think, I know that the staff worked really hard in trying to find ways to cut, and I am comfortable with most of these, including and not limited to the public art situation. I have heard from community telling us, when you're in a budget crunch, why are we focusing on public art? And so this is, again, one opinion out of 7. So I'm comfortable with moving forward to try to balance this budget. And again, these are recommendations simply to keep the mill levy the same. I actually wanted something that would reduce the mill levy, and we're about to talk about that next.
I guess this is a
Confirming
great
that-
place to say raise the mill levy.
And confirming that state law requires a balanced budget. So difficult decisions have to be made in some way or another.
Correct.
And it sounds too that the two things that there's been the most discussion about, public art and animal control, I think are the ones where there's been the most discussion. Those are in 2027. Is that, whereas most of the 2026 items, it looks like there was discussion about trees.
Elizabeth, I just have a
Yes.
question slash comment slash observation, just make sure I'm on the right track. So let's say for public art, for example, we're saying in 2026, keep it intact. And I always like to remind people, it's not public art. We're not putting statues on the side of bridges or, whatever. We're just making our infrastructure aesthetically pleasing. And that can be through murals, it can be through design work in terms of, how lighting is placed, whatever. So I try and caution people from, it's not art, it's just making sure that our design are aesthetically pleasing for the community. But in 2026, for example, and I could go through any of those 14 through 19, I'm just pulling out 16. We're saying keep it intact for 2026, and then in 2027, potentially cutting it in half, correct? Okay. Keep in mind, and I've said this before, every year that I've been on council since January of 2019, we've had potential budget deficits, and we are able to always work with staff to be, with finance, to be able to come to solutions. So even if we said, right now, potentially that's there could be a scenario where revenue increases, other costs decrease, so that we'll be voting on the 26 budget and not the 27 budget, correct?
That's correct.
Yes. So I'm keeping my eye on 26 more than even 27, because
Yeah.
that's what's the first immediate goal that we need to address. I like the way we were being forward thinking. I like the fact that we're taking all things into consideration, but 2026 is what our main focus needs to be.
I think a way to the way I think about it is my charge is to balance 2026 and to do what we can to make 2027 as balanced as possible, and to not make any decisions that would make 2027 worse.
Okay, thank you so much.
Does
Yep.
that make sense?
Yep.
That's,
Last question up to this point would be exceeding revenue neutral is balancing the budget, exceeding revenue neutral is what this is.
yes. And I've got some slides on revenue that are forthcoming, so.
Just for public sake, I guess, the tree planting is maybe the only thing that I have a major concern with in 26.
Yeah.
Aside from that, I think the rest of looks all right.
Yeah, and we haven't, because we've not implemented the completely built-out strategic planning, performance management framework, I think it's kind of a leap to think about it now. But eventually, we'll be using data on an ongoing basis, not just to guide the budget as putting the budget book together, but guiding operations throughout the year. So if there were big changes in swimming pool usage or big changes when it comes to drought restrictions, what that performance management framework allows you to do is to be more data informed on not just once a year, but an ongoing basis. So that requires, I realize, a lot of trust, but that's where we plan on going. So.
Thank you.
Okay, the next one, this represents a second budget that there's been talk about. So just some background on property tax. The final estimated valuation will be available to the city of Wichita by June 15th by state statute. The revenue neutral rate, or R&R statute, remains in effect. There was some discussion during the legislative session, but there were no changes for this budget year. And so any growth over 2025 would exceed the revenue neutral rate. So our valuation for last year was around $5 billion. If our valuation was $1 over that amount, we would not be able to capture that growth unless the city council voted to exceed the revenue neutral rate. This most likely, because we're expecting growth in assessed valuation, this would lower the mill levy and the city's mill levy rate, and it would reduce general fund revenues. So these are components of assessed valuation. New construction was 1.3% for this year. We're expecting 1.5%. Something that I like to point out, like, for example, we funded improvements at the Empower Evergreen facility on 21st Street, and I recently went to do our ARPA site visit for grant compliance. If you've been to that facility, you know that for all intents and purposes, it's a new facility, but that wouldn't be considered new construction because the envelope of the building was already in place. And there's quite a bit of that occurs in Wichita. Expiring exemptions, these are mostly for the expiration of TIF districts. Reappraisal, so this is any, well, except for the other category, this is any other growth. So we're expecting 5.9%, estimating 5.9% this year, which is 2% lower than last year. But then that was our initial scenario. Then we provide you another scenario, which is slightly higher AV growth, which is 7%. The county appraiser provides an update to the county commission each year, just of the mass appraisal report. So it's kind of difficult to backtrack from there to what the city of Wichita appraisal will be, but based on that information, a slightly higher amount is built into the budget currently. So in 2026, there'd be a considerable decrease in revenue received if you went with an R&R budget. It would be less if you went with only capturing new construction and then a CPI increase on reappraisal. So those are two different numbers, so they're not cumulative, they're just different numbers.
Synthesizing this for everybody else as well, even with what's going to be presented through items 20 through 25, we would still have to exceed revenue neutral, but it would be revenue neutral just capturing construction and CPI.
That's correct.
But we would still have to issue a exceeding revenue neutral letter to the state to say that we have the intent to exceed revenue neutral.
Yeah, to the county, yes.
To the county.
Yeah.
And if we don't, and let's say there is no intent to exceed revenue neutral, instead of items 20 to 25 in 2026 cutting 2.8, we would have to cut 7.3, correct?
Yes.
Correct. And then in 2027, we'd have to cut 19.2 with current projections.
Yes.
Okay. And then last question I have regarding that too, the CPI plus new construction at 4.1% growth, that's around the growth of what the private sector would be in those same periods, correct? In 2026 and 2027?
That's the same, could you repeat that?
It would be the same growth as the private sector of new construction plus the CPI.
Yeah, this would be a look back on what the CPI was
Yeah.
for the period that the appraisal period.
To be projection of what the private sector grew at.
Yeah, and so I think that's, we've talked a lot about timing. Like I mentioned with franchise fees and sales tax, the timing is very quick from when the activity occurred to when we receive the revenue. This one is different because there's such a lag too. I think that that's also part of the challenge, is that people are operating in 2025. This will be taxes paid in 2026, but it's based on activity that happened in 2024.
Correct.
And I think that that's also part of the challenge, because largely, we'll always remember 2024, right? Maybe or maybe not. But a lot of times that's behind, when people are paying their tax bill, they're like, oh, 2024 was a great year,
Okay.
So I think that's some of the challenge too.
Thank you.
I want to make sure that we're clear too. On the R&R compliant number, the 7.3 is an addition to the 2 million in the base. Is that correct, Elizabeth?
Is it? Yeah. It's on top.
And the same with the 19.2, you need to add another 5 million?
Yeah,
from the
I think it's
base.
5.8, right?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, so just, yeah. And that matches how on the cover sheet of your handout, which is the modified growth assumption, you have the 2.8 million is the top line, on the top, 2.8 and 5.2. So that matches the bottom line of this table. Yeah. So, Okay, so these are modified growth options. Now, some of these concepts, we put them here, we put things in different tables, and, and obviously we can change them. So if there are things here that you would like to have moved to a different table, we can do that. But the first concept here is discontinuing stump removals. There's $250,000 budgeted a year for, this is dead trees, dead stumps. A list of them is bid out. There would be about 800 to 850 fewer tree stumps removed per year. The next one is that concept from police, which is instead of impacting emergency response and persons crime investigations, which would be to discontinue all shelter operations by 2027. So this is on top of the field operations concept. Number 22, and there's quite a bit of text here, and for background information that was provided to us by the department. It's to eliminate City Hall security in 2027. This would be, there have been discussions in the past about how City Hall security is provided, what kind of staff, what hours, and so forth, but this would be moving this from being a police department function to moving it to being a public works function. There's not been, I don't know that there's been any discussion of this concept. This would be the first time. This is you might complain that you see the same things over and over again, but not this one. This is a fresh one for you to consider. The next one, number 23, this would be reverting to aerial truck staffing as it had been in the past. Because of the SAFER grant, 2 trucks were added to get to a total of 7. And then the staffing on those 2 new trucks and the existing 5 was increased from 3 to 4. And as I understand it, that makes firefighting more effective because instead of 3 people being in one group, they can split into 2 groups. You now have 2 groups of 2 for the sake of safety. So.
That sounds even more dangerous, having less firefighters on the truck.
This is the.
This is the model
list.
that was used
Yeah.
before the SAFER grant, and we've got data that shows the impact of the additional positions and what that's done in terms of response time and on-ground operations. But this would just roll back to what we had had previously. We're not saying these are all easy decisions, and there are ramifications on all of these, so, but I just, again, we're dealing with pretty big numbers, and we're trying to figure out how to get there.
Okay, my input here. Stump removal, man, I hear it in my district all the time. Animal control already, yeah, not on board with that. Aerial truck staffing, I think that's a public safety issue, especially with the firefighters on the truck. So the 26 numbers here, I'm not on board with any of those.
I'll also go on record, I have no interest in item number 23. I think that's an essential function. And I do have concerns about the other ones. I know we've talked about the only way that we're going to be able to do that, we could look at other revenue streams, but I have no interest in eliminating personnel from 3 units or from 4 to 3. So that would just be a non-starter for me.
A question. So given that we have a community-wide survey and we have the lower right-hand corner being the most important and, or anything on the right side being important from police services to fire services, those are our core functions. Then you have the lower 50%. Why are there no suggestions from the lower 50% in these scenarios? So I would like to see the matrix again and base it off of where people in our community believe importance of services are. Police and fire are the most important. That's public safety. But then you have under 50%, no offense to you, J.V. Johnston, but golf being on the lower 50%. So can we talk about maybe the things that are of lower importance, and that's where we would focus on reductions?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. When we put assigned things to the different tiers or the different tables, that's one of the concepts that's one of the frames that we use to assign things, so that's why you'll see more park items that were in the first round than over here, right? And so we get to the very, very bottom of the list, and that's where this fire truck staffing item appears. When it comes to golf, that golf fund doesn't receive any general fund support, so, but there are some other items on the left side, like planning is over there, and they have a revenue increase, MABCD, swimming pools we've already touched on, trees are on the left side, and we've got 2 tree items. I'm just seeing the
Animal
survey
con-
in my mind.
Animal control's on the left side.
Animal control.
Actually, everything on this list, except for the aerial truck staffing, is on the left-hand side, I believe.
Stormwater is close. Yeah, it's in the middle.
I'd also like to point out, left side of the list is at 65%. Is that how we drew up the quadrants?
I think it's around 50, is it 60? Well, I think it is in the 60s.
Yeah, I think the
Because
charts-
library is close to there, and library is barely on the right side.
Right, so it's kind of an arbitrary line that we've drawn up as far as the quadrants go. Because it could still be 55%, over half of the city wants it to be increased or sees the necessary, how necessary it is. But just because we drew the line at 65%, I think that's just something to keep in mind moving forward. Is that's the kind of the line that we drew in the sand there, not necessarily the line most residents of Wichita have drawn.
It's a median. It was a median of results. So the last 2 items, this next one here is to adjust the ERU fee. So the general fund, the city of Wichita and Sedgwick County both fund flood control. It's in a city-county fund, and it's a 50-50 split. And so the general fund that comes out of taxpayer support, the concept here would be to raise the ERU so that the stormwater utility transferred into the city-county fund for its 50%. And so in the case, I know there's also been discussion about neighborhood improvements being funded out of the ERU. Oh, here we go. There's been discussion about neighborhood improvements, more neighborhood improvements being funded out of stormwater. So either this increase, if there's an increase just for floodway, those neighborhood improvements would be pushed into the future, or there would have to be an increase in the ERU for both. So that's what that concept is. And then the last thing, there's already $3 million a year budgeted to transfer in from the stabilization reserve to the general fund for these 3 years. This would be just $282,000 on top of that. We use that to get to the $2.8 million that it would take to implement this change. So, of course, I mean, these are estimated amounts based on how much we expect in new construction and reappraisal growth from our AV notice. We haven't received that yet. We'll receive that in June, and I know that will be a big focus of the workshop that's at the end of June. But for now, these are concepts that we have received from departments.
So wrapping a bow on all of this and maybe leading into the next discussion point as well, if we will still have to exceed revenue neutral, but let's say that we just wanted to collect CPI new construction, and we didn't want to make all these cuts on this page, and we didn't have suggestions that supplemented these cuts, then the only other way would be to increase revenues from another source.
Yeah, or something like a big hiring freeze, or coming up with, instead of doing this strategically, you would, what we've done in the past when we've had big revenue decreases is we just delayed hiring. So this is the more strategic approach. So you'll see in the handout or in the presentation that if one were to pursue a different source of revenue, there's time involved in it too. So it would probably be a relatively risky maneuver if you were planning on balance, if the charge is to balance 2026 and you don't have an alternative revenue source in place and you haven't picked these concepts, you probably need to pick some others.
So you look at either other revenue sources like a sales tax, or like Councilman Johnson wants, a property tax increase. Those would be the other options to increase revenues.
For 2026? Yeah, I think that even if a sales tax increase, Mark will go into, there's timing issues. I think that even if you were to have a referendum this fall, I don't think you would start receiving revenue until quite a ways into 2026.
Okay, thank you.
So it's the old adage about a bird in a hand is worth more than two in the bush, isn't that the adage? So, yeah, it's trick. So those are the concepts for 2026.
Just for clarification, for anybody watching, we only would have to make these decisions if we took in less than the total AV?
Yes, or if you remove some items from the previous list and you needed to plug your hole, you could consider one of these.
But if we took in the total AV, we don't have to worry about this?
Yeah, you wouldn't, but I think you took some things off of the first list, didn't you? But I think they're mostly 2027 things.
I just
Yeah.
wanted to clear it up for anybody watching who might be terrified of like number 23, or the people who pay attention to the death threats some of us have got here at City Hall, like that. These only really are serious if we don't take in the total AV. So if we go with a modified AV, then we really got to get serious about some of these items.
Or go back and find different ideas, yeah.
Okay.
So,
City Manager, can you address just the situation we're in? I think, yes, we're trying to balance the budget for '26, but while I know that there are suggestions to balance it in '26, I'm actually more concerned about '27, and so we still have to make tough decisions. So can you address how you're using, whether it's the matrix to make decisions to address it with your 16 departments, or because I know that one of the suggestions that Elizabeth mentioned was a hiring freeze. And when I hear it from community, they tell me that the most important thing is they want to make sure that when they call 911, a police officer, a firefighter, or an EMS worker will come out to answer that call. So can you address, I guess, how, because these are tough decisions, no matter how you put it, someone's not going to be happy about the decisions that are going to have to be made by this council. How are you prioritizing?
Well, Mayor, our priorities have been set by you, the council, in terms of your strategic direction. And so you're right, what's been in the magenta over the last few years has driven our budget process, and including the thought process that we went through in trying to bring to you some initial recommendations or thoughts for balancing the budget. If you look at what's in the green and the blue, we have brought some recommendations to you. There have been a number of program options that were suggested by departments that are not included in this budget because they're not in the higher priority areas. Where we have some difficulties are conflicts between those colored quadrants and some of your goals and strategies. For instance, if you look at the work that's being done by the library isn't necessarily, well, actually, I think the library's kind of on the edge, isn't it? Where it's, yeah, right there. The library's actually moved from previous years. Let's say parks, for instance. There are certain things that in parks that we are not bringing forward to you, but at the same time, you've got tactics about making services available to low and moderate income residents, those who have the least ability to pay for our services, that we then offer them, we still offer them park and recreation opportunities. So we can't just do a complete gut of the program, so to speak. The issue of a hiring freeze is one that we've kicked around for the last 30 days. But if you do it, it can't look like the traditional hiring freeze. It has to be done from a strategic standpoint and be reflective of your goals. So it would require a lot of review work. A hiring freeze is not, what do I want to say? It's not always fair to the organization, or more importantly, to the mayor and council, because you may have high turnover in some of your highest priority departments. And so, and we saw this during the recession when we did do a hiring freeze. We had a number of departments that had a significant number of retirements. And so we lost a lot of expertise as a result of that, and those positions were frozen for an extended period of time, because the only ones that were truly exempted were our field staff in police, fire, and somewhat in public works, although public works still took a significant amount. So if we went to a hiring freeze, we'd want to follow your priorities both in this document and there. And then it would have to be, we'd have to have a target number that we're going to try to achieve in that regard. But it's one way of downsizing the organization. But there are outcome problems with that, and that's what we would have to identify for you. If we were to eliminate X number of positions in parks, for instance, we'd have to explain to you what we could not get accomplished, changes we'd have to make in park maintenance, probably changes in recreational subsidies, some things like that. So there are a lot of moving pieces, but I will tell you, as we put it together, we were pretty mindful of what you approved in the strategic plan, as well as what we've heard now from two years of doing this exercise on our budget, or our survey, sorry.
I think that you all are ready to talk about sales tax. We've already been hearing a little bit of it, so I'm going to pass the podium off to Mark.
Well, good morning. Mark Manning with the Department of Finance. So today my task is to provide you about 40 years of history on the sales tax, hopefully in about 15 or maybe 20 minutes or so, depending what your preference is. So as you know, in the city of Wichita, we do not have a city sales tax. We are in a minority in the state of Kansas in that regard, particularly with the largest cities in the state. We do, of course, have a county-wide sales tax from which the city of Wichita receives a portion. That county-wide tax was approved in 1985 here in Sedgwick County. Now, that county-wide tax generates somewhere in the neighborhood of $140 million a year. However, what the city of Wichita receives from that is based on state statute. And that statute allocates that sales tax revenue half based on our population as a ratio to the county. And that's been pretty constant over the years at somewhere in the neighborhood of 75%. A little higher, a little lower, but generally 75%. The other half of that formula is based on the amount of taxes each city levies relative to the other cities. That percentage has gone down significantly for the city of Wichita over the last 30 years, which is to say that currently we receive about 57% of the countywide sales tax. When it was implemented in 1985, we received about 65%. So that percentage has been decreasing over the years for the city. But right now we get about 57% of it. Now, our sales tax here is what they call a general purpose sales tax, which means it's not restricted for any specific use by the referendum that was approved by the voters in 1985. However, a number of pledges were made in 1985, including by the city. And that pledge in 1985 was to spend half of it for property tax relief and half of it for roads, bridges, and freeways. And the city actually codified our pledge in an ordinance that was adopted in 1985. And as I'll show you here in a few minutes, the city has basically adhered to that pledge for the last 39 years, I guess. So this is what the city's mill levy rate looks like. Remember, 1985 is the pre-sales tax year. You can see our mill levy rate was somewhere in the neighborhood of 42 mills. You can see the line dropped significantly in 1986. That is the 8 mill drop that the city of Wichita implemented after the sales tax was approved and began to be collected. Now, the noise there in the next couple of years is mainly due to reclassification and reappraisal that occurred at the state level. There's a lot of gyrations that happen in the mill levy, which would be a long topic for a different day. But suffice to say that our mill levy stabilized in roughly 1993, and as you can see, it's essentially been flat since 1993, and it's been flat at a much lower level than it was in 1985. And again, all of that, what you're seeing on this slide, is a representation of the city using 1/2 of the countywide sales tax to reduce our property taxes here in the city of Wichita. So I have a couple of slides to show you the sales tax rate in Wichita compared to a number of our peers. And again, every city has different needs, every city has different tax policies. So this isn't to say the city of Wichita is good or better than any other city. It's just to demonstrate the differences in the tax policy here in the city of Wichita compared to some of our peer cities. So there's 26 first-class cities in Kansas. First class is generally larger cities. Of those 26 cities, 2 do not have city sales tax, and that's Wichita and Newton. This graphic shows you what the sales tax rate in those other 25 cities is. Now, obviously, I'm combining the 24 that have a city and county sales tax in the bar to the right. But the takeaway is the sales tax rate here in the city of Wichita is 7.5%, 6.5% from the state, 1% from the county. In Newton, it's 8.5%, 6.5% from the state, 2% for the county. In the other 24 cities combined, it's an average of somewhere in the neighborhood of north of 9%. And that's because those 24 cities have an average sales tax rate of about 1.47%, and they have an average county rate of about 1.25%. And again, they vary significantly. Yes, ma'am.
Mark, just also for context, the mill levy in Wichita is about 32.743. Newton's mill levy is 72.361, just for context while we're comparing Wichita and Newton.
Mayor, I think you're about one slide ahead of me. But yes, ma'am, you are correct. So anyway, takeaway is we have the lowest sales tax rate of any large city in the state of Kansas, and it's by a significant amount for the most part, particularly when you consider the cities up in the Kansas City metro area, which tend to have sales tax rates in the plus 9% range. So let's look at just in Sedgwick County. There's 20 cities in Sedgwick County, of which the city of Wichita is one. 10 of those 20 have a local sales tax, a city sales tax. You can see it's 1% everywhere except for the city of Sedgwick, which is 0.5%. So in other words, there's 9 cities in Sedgwick County that currently have a sales tax rate of 8.5%. And again, you can see the city has no bar because we have no city sales tax rate. So what I did on this chart, and hopefully it's readable, but I did plot the mill levy rates of those cities in Sedgwick County that have a city sales tax. And the takeaway is they are all higher than the city of Wichita. As the mayor mentioned, we're at about 32.7, somewhere in that neighborhood. Keachai is down around 36%. They're by far the closest one. Hayesville's about 40. But you can see the mill levy rates in some of the other cities is a little bit higher than our 32 mills. By the way, we are the second lowest mill levy rate within all the cities in Sedgwick County. Viola, Kansas is about 10 mills lower than us. They're at about 21 mills, but I would point out that they levy about 1/1000th of the amount of taxes that we levy. So I don't know that I'd consider them peer, but they are lower than us. So let's do the same thing and expand out to the MSA. MSA, I'm looking at Butler County, Sumner County, Harvey County, Reno County, Sedgwick County. So these are the largest cities in the MSA. And same story, these cities all have city sales taxes. Now, Butler County is one of the 7 counties in the state of Kansas that does not have a countywide levy. So you can see El Dorado, for example, they're equal to us, but that's because they have the 6.5% rate and a 1 cent city sales tax, but no county sales tax. But takeaway is in the region, the city of Wichita is on the lower end of the larger cities in our area. And I also plotted the mill levy rates, and you can see the same story there. Our mill levy rate is lower than all the other larger cities in our MSA area. So with that, I want to pivot to how the actual sales tax works. And, you know, I won't go into a lot of detail. I'm not an attorney, but I can tell you how it works from our standpoint. And that is that the Kansas Department of Revenue administers the entire sales tax for the state of Kansas. There is no flexibility. There is no ability for locals to interject themselves in that process. It is entirely regulated and administered by the Department of Revenue, and all that's based on statutory provisions. Now, statutes have a number of carve-outs on what is exempt from the state sales tax. They're voluminous, so the state administers that. The state statute also has a few areas
that are applied only to cities and not to the state of Kansas. There's generally about 4 areas there. One is utilities, but the other one that's probably the most relevant is food and food ingredients, which I'm going to call groceries. Food and food ingredients is what it's called in statute, but effectively it's groceries. You may know the state of Kansas exempted their sales tax from groceries and phased it in over a couple of years, and I think it took effect finally in January of this year. But based on state statute, local taxes are still applicable to groceries. So, for example, if you go and buy your groceries at a local grocery store, right now you will see a 1% sales tax on your receipt. That is the county-wide 1% sales tax that you're being taxed on. And again, that's based on state statute. There is zero flexibility for local units to change that. It would have to be a statutory change. You might wonder how much of that impact does that have on a family in Kansas. Now, every family in Wichita is different, in Wichita I should say. Every family is different, so I'm doing a gross average, and I recognize that many differences. But if you look at an average family, we would estimate that an average family would spend around $5,000 a year on groceries. Again, wide variation, but that's what the average family would spend. By the way, I did a lot of research, but one thing that was particularly useful was some research that the Kansas Health Institute did when the state was considering their sales tax. And I trying to think what the right word was. I don't want to say I plagiarized, but let's just say I utilized. How about utilize is better? I utilized some of their research in this regard. I also looked at a lot of census data. United States Census provides a lot of income data and stratifies it by source. So again, this is the best we can do. We would estimate that a half-cent sales tax, for example, would cost an average Wichita family about $28 a year, which means the countywide tax is costing an average family about $56 a year right now. So.
Is that a family of 5?
You're getting into a level of detail I can't answer. It's an average family. That's the statistical average family that the United States Census uses. So.
Okay, so family of 4.4, I guess.
Probably, yes.
Okay,
Like I said, if you're, if you're a senior on your own, your family size will be different. If you have 10 kids, your family size will be different. But it's just a homogenation of a bunch of data to come up with an average.
Okay,
So.
thank you.
But anyway, takeaways, half-cent sales tax would be roughly about $28 a year to an average family. So how is a sales tax implemented? And again, everything here is based on state statute. And there's a number of things that have to occur in a certain sequence, and there's a number of statutory dates that have to be adhered to. But the first thing that has to happen is the governing body has to adopt a resolution authorizing a referendum. And again, that's what happened in 1985 here. Once that occurs, the next step is to coordinate with the elections officer across the street and place it on the ballot. Again, the election officer has certain timelines in which they want it prior to the next election cycle, but has to be provided to the election officer. And then finally, obviously, it is put on the ballot at the next election for voters to approve or disapprove. This process generally takes somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 days from start to finish. It could take a little longer, although if I remember correctly, I think the statute requires it to occur within 6 months of a referendum being approved. So takeaway is this process would take, if a city decided today to approve a referendum, maybe it would be approved 90 to 180 days out. So.
Quick question, Mark.
Yes, sir.
Now, there was a new law passed on the state legislature last year that consolidated, I believe, all elections into the fall. So we might look into this. This is something that they did pass last year.
Yeah.
So it's pretty new. I don't know if this would fall under that. So if we went along this timeline and got it placed, let's say next year, would it be the primary in August, or would it be the general election in November? Just a question, I think, to look into. Or is it that we can still do it whenever we want to?
I guess I'd answer you this way. What I'm telling you is what the timeline is from approval of referendum to
Right.
the election, but what I'm not telling you is the answer to your question. What are the options for what a election date is? And I'd have to defer to others or do a little bit more research to find out what those options are. But
Okay, appreciate that.
And I imagine the political landscape has changed quite significantly since 1985, but the results of the 1985 election were 54.66 in favor and 45.34 opposed.
Yep. So this is what would get something on the ballot to get approved. Unfortunately, that is not the end of the process. Oh, by the way, a few things that to take into consideration. In a referendum, again, the city, based on state statute, can have a general purpose tax, any city, of up to 2%. For example, I noted Newton had a 2% sales tax. In addition to that, the state statutes allow a city to have a special purpose sales tax of up to 1%. So in theory, a city could have a 3% sales tax. Now, I'm not aware of any, haven't looked at every city, but I'm not aware of a city that has a 3% city sales tax, but it would be possible under statute. Sales tax can be approved in increments of 1/20th. For example, you could have a 0.05 or 1/20th percent of a sales tax if you chose to. That's pretty uncommon, but it is common to have a 1 1/8% sales tax, which is 1.125, for example. So basically, that statutory provision allows you to do sales tax in eighths if you choose to. Now, once a referendum is approved, there's another lag time after that. The next thing that the entity has to do is notify the Department of Revenue, because they're responsible for collecting it. Department of Revenue requires 90 days of notification prior to implementation, but they also only implement on the first of a quarter. So again, depending on your timing, it could be another 180 days from the Department of Revenue's actual implementation from when a referendum is approved. And then finally, on top of all that, when Department of Revenue starts collecting, it usually takes about 2 months for that revenue to reach the local unit. So the bottom line is you're looking at a lag of maybe 10 months, maybe 12 months, maybe 9 months. Hard to say, but it's not immediate, I guess would be the point I would make. So let's talk about the two kinds of sales tax briefly, special purpose and general purpose. Again, a special purpose, as the name implies, is for a specific thing. Think of the Intrust Bank Arena sales tax that the county implemented in 2005. That was a special purpose sales tax. It was specifically to develop the Intrust Bank Arena. It also had an expiration. It expired in 30 months. So it's an example of a sales tax that had an expiration. By the way, special purpose sales tax by statute have to expire in at least 10 years. They can expire sooner, but a special purpose tax must have an expiration. Now, contrast that to a general purpose sales tax, which again is what we have here in Sedgwick County. That obviously is for general purposes, although it's not uncommon for the intent to be expressed by an ordinance or a pledge, which again is what I mentioned earlier that the city of Wichita did in 1985. And so the 85 Sedgwick County sales tax is a good example of a general purpose sales tax. So let's pivot to how much money a sales tax would generate here in the city of Wichita. And the first thing I would tell you is it's a little bit of a challenge to estimate because the city of Wichita is not a specific taxing district for sales tax. So you have to take a lot of data from the Department of Revenue and kind of make some estimates based on it. And I would also tell you that a lot of the data that the Department of Revenue has, as you would expect, is confidential. So we have to be careful on what we do and say with that data. But the bottom line is we believe a 1% sales tax in Wichita in 2027, and I use that because of the lead time, would generate somewhere in the neighborhood of $115 million a year. And you can see I just did the math and provided different options for different portions. For example, a half cent maybe generate somewhere in the $55, $60 million range. I mentioned earlier the city gets about 57.2% of the countywide sales tax. One estimate I used in this table is Department of Revenue estimates that of the local sales tax here, about 76% is actually generated in the city of Wichita. And that's basically what this estimate is reflecting here. So in other words, we get, 20% less than the sales tax that's currently generated within the city of Wichita. The other thing I probably should have pointed out, I mentioned the county generates about $140 million in sales tax now. There's a thing that they call the pull factor that the Department of Revenue does a lot of reports on every year. The pull factor is how much sales tax are you sucking into your community from folks that live outside the community, and that's going to vary around the state. In Wichita, Department of Revenue, they have several methodologies, but they estimate the pull factor here to be somewhere in the 20 to 30% range, meaning that $140 million, 80% of it is paid by local residents, for example, and maybe the other 20% or so is paid by visitors to our community. Of course, we are a economic hub for South Central Kansas. There's about a little over a million people that live within 100 miles of the city of Wichita, so it stands to reason that we would have a fairly significant pull factor here. So I want to finish up here with just some examples on how a sales tax could be used, and these are obviously, as you'll see, kind of based on what happened in 1985. One thing a city sales tax could be used for is to reduce our mill levy rate. Again, we did that in 1985. We use $5 million for a mill. You know, recognize that number is going to go up every year, but somewhere in the neighborhood of $5.5 million a year probably is what a mill generates. There's a couple complications. You know, our TIF districts would suffer if our mill levy decreased because that increment is based on our city mill levy. So it would be a marginal effect on the TIFs, but we'd probably want to think about that a little bit. Motor vehicle tax is a very complicated formula, but it's based on the average mill levy in the county. So if the city reduced our mill levy, the average mill levy would go down, so our motor vehicle would decrease a little bit. These are marginal around the edges things, but just things that we would certainly want to consider. Final thing I should point out is I mentioned the state statutory formula that allocates how sales tax is distributed to the city, and I mentioned half of it is based on taxes levied. So obviously if the city reduces our taxes levied, that portion of the formula would decrease, which means we'd get less of the countywide mill levy. Except, you may remember last year the legislature worked with Sedgwick County, our partners are at Sedgwick County, and actually amended that statute to freeze the taxes levied portion because the county raised a good point, and that is that cities are penalized in the county for reducing their mill levy rate. And so the legislature actually froze that half of the formula, which means that the city would not be faced with that if we reduced our mill levy, which would be a good for the city. I just point that out because, you know, that formula is subject to the will of the legislature. So if that formula was ever amended again, it could be problematic for the city. But currently, that formula is not problematic for the city. We would just want to look out for the impact on TIFs and maybe a little bit on motor vehicle taxes. So what would a half-cent sales tax cost for an average family in Wichita? This is my hypothetical average family again. We mentioned the food portion. An average family in Wichita, again, I'm going from the data, $70,000 roughly. They spend, if you stratify that by what's taxable and what's not taxable, roughly half of that consumption is taxable. You know, things like your haircut or your mortgage payment or your rent payment or your doctor's office copay and a variety of other things is not taxable based on state statute. But roughly about 50% is. So maybe an average family has about $35,000 worth of consumption that is taxable. So if you do the math there, that means that a half-cent sales tax would probably cost an average family somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe $176. Again, recognizing there could be wide variations based on what the actual income level was, but again, I'm just providing you a homogenized estimate of what a half-cent sales tax would cost an average family. To kind of put that in perspective, what's an average family that owns a home here in Wichita? What do they spend in city property taxes? Of course, they have to pay county and state taxes, of which we have no control. But currently, an average home in Wichita pays somewhere in the neighborhood of $816 a year in annual property taxes to the city of Wichita. So just to put all that in perspective on this slide here.
Mark, may I pause and just ask a very quick question?
Yes, ma'am.
And so what I hear this slide saying is that the average family pays $816 in property taxes, and if we did a half-cent sales tax, it would be $176. So it looks like a great savings, correct?
Well, not exactly. Sorry. The 816 is based on our current mill levy of 32 mills. So
Okay.
it would depend on how much lower that mill levy was lowered compared to 175.
Okay.
And I think you're a slide ahead of me too.
Okay,
so
I'm sorry.
I'll
And
go
then
ahead
I'm 99.9% sure I know the answer to this question, but I'm just going to throw it out there. I think of maybe some of our, seniors or vulnerable populations who don't pay property tax. They have rental or other, arrangements. Granted, if property taxes go up, landlords, renters renters usually, pass that along, but that isn't taken into account in this in any way, correct?
Yes, ma'am, you are 100% correct.
Not 99.9, 100%. Okay, thank you.
I'm just using average data to demonstrate hypothetical situations, but you're right, there are a number of nuances that would impact this at all. So I guess since you mentioned that, Councilmember Tuttle, I'll go ahead and tell you what's coming up in the next couple of slides. About a $6 million decrease would be roughly the $176 on an average home in Wichita.
Real quick, is there a way we can get a breakdown on how this impacts people more by economic levels, like a family who makes $40,000 a year as opposed to 70? Is there any way we can get some numbers akin to that?
That's a real challenge because I just don't have the data. The census data is based on an average family, and, I'd have to know what an average family that earns $40,000 a year, what they spend their money on. And no doubt that mix is going to be different than what the average census family is. That, it's difficult to do that.
But a $6 million decrease to property taxes would equal about the 176.
Ballpark, yes, sir. Yeah.
If you own the property.
Well,
right.
Yeah. Your couple slides, I'll get to that slide here in a couple minutes, but yes, so what's another option for the sales tax? Again, we used it in 1985 for capital infrastructure. That is an option. Now we have a significant amount of public safety infrastructure needs over the next 5 or 6 years or so. This is police stations, fire apparatus, police equipment, police training centers, and a variety of other things. Now, currently, these will be funded from general obligation bonds within the CIP. We do have limited capacity there, and what you're going to see there is that's going to impact our ability to fund this $91 million in a timely manner. Projects may get pushed out into latter years, may get deferred. We've committed, again, to station building programs, some other things, but all I'm saying is since it's general obligation funded, and since there's limited capacity there, it will be a challenge to incorporate that entire $91 million within the proposed CIP that we will present to you in July. We'll do the best we can, but it likely some things will be deferred or pushed out. Obviously, a sales tax would change that scenario significantly if it was used for public safety infrastructure. It would do a couple things. It would reduce our general obligation costs of providing this infrastructure, which means we would need to borrow less money paid back by the debt service fund, which is supported by the property tax mill levy. It would also provide us the ability to accelerate those projects, as I noted before, because we wouldn't have the funding constraints necessarily that we would have with using GEO funding. And finally, more than likely, we would pay cash for all of these improvements. That's probably how we would time it. So that would significantly improve the viability of the debt service fund by lowering our debt, lowering our future debt service requirements, and allowing us to pay more cash for GEO projects, which again just kind of perpetuates itself. So now, Councilmember Glasscock brought up some questions about the mill levy and debt service fund. Excellent questions. I'd have to model a lot of that, but fundamentally, what I'm telling you is the debt service fund would be in a lot better shape progressively as the years went on, and there would be some flexibility probably to look at mill levy rates in the debt service fund at some point into the future. Finally, and obviously this is coming from a finance person because we like to have stabilized city finances, but a sales tax would have some advantages to our financial structure here at the City of Wichita. Advantages, as I noted previously, that we typically do not have compared to a lot of our peer cities in the state of Kansas and in the region. Sales tax revenues would actually smooth out our ups and downs in our general fund. And that's because on a correlation basis, the ups and downs of a sales tax are not well correlated with the ups and downs of a property tax, which is good. That means when property tax goes up a lot, sales tax doesn't go up so much. When property tax goes down, sales tax generally doesn't go down, and vice versa. Now, I think statistics was one of the classes when I took at the university that I did not make an A or B in, so I am by no means a statistician, but I do know how to do regression analysis, and the R squared, if you're up in the high 90s, that's very highly correlated. That means if something goes up 1, the other variable is probably going to go up about 90.99. The correlation of sales tax revenues to our property tax revenues is 0.05, which is clear down on the other end of the scale, which tells you again that they're not highly correlated. The benefit to the city, more smoothness in our revenue streams over time, which helps us maintain stable service levels, and we kind of get away from some of this up and down that we've had the last few years. Again, it would also allow us to focus on strategies that are important to the city council, i.e., we mentioned earlier, one of the pillars is keep Wichita safe. I mentioned the amount of capital investment that we have upcoming in our public safety, in particular our law enforcement arena. And then finally, I mentioned it would help us stabilize our general fund. You know the challenges there. Elizabeth provided a whole bunch of slides on that, so I won't go into that. So it would stabilize our general fund, but it would also stabilize and improve the situation significantly of our debt service fund, which are two things that would be really beneficial. I guess that's my last slide. So I know I threw a bunch of information, and I think I probably took a lot longer than 15 minutes, so sorry about that. But I'd be happy to answer any more questions if you have any. I think you have a thought piece. It's 6 or 7 pages long, too, so.
A few additional, just quick questions. Mill levy, this body could do and just dictate to the public an increase. However, sales tax would require the public buy-in of what their level of taxation would be.
That is correct. Sales tax requires a vote by the electorate in a referendum, and property tax can be set by the governing body when they adopt the budget.
Okay, so I did try to do some quick math here just for talking points. So let's say we do a transfer of, let's say it's a 1% sales tax, and it's at 6 mills, which would stabilize what an average family would pay in property tax versus that. That would leave about $34 million a year to cash fund projects. Would that be correct?
1%?
Yeah.
Well, 1% would generate somewhere in the neighborhood of 115 million. So depending on how much you wanted to divert to capital improvement infrastructure, but I think your mill levy reduction would probably be significantly higher than 6 mills, again, based on the policy direction. Because everything I showed you here, including 6 mills, was based on a ½ cent.
Okay. Thank you.
Mark, one thing.
Yes, sir.
Are we pretty similar to Johnson County with structure or not?
Similar in what regard?
As far as county and cities within the county?
Well, I think Johnson County has a lot less rural area than Sedgwick County does, for one thing. And they're a little bit more affluent up there, and their assessed valuation is considerably higher than ours per capita, if that answers your question.
I just noticed their mill levy was substantially lower than ours.
That's because they have a significant amount of assessed valuation up there. Their property valuation is significantly higher per capita than here in the city of Wichita.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mark, I'd be very interested in looking at pursuing this if the will of the body is there, given that we could also reduce the property tax evaluation for individuals. Some of the points in your handout that you gave us as well that I'll just highlight, and you talked about it, but I think this is highlighting again for the public, balancing these two sources would likely produce more consistent and less variable revenue growth in the general fund over the long term, which I think would help stabilize a lot of our service levels in the future. You talked about this to create a more balanced revenue portfolio, and then you conclude, and I think this is significantly important as well, is the use of a city sales tax to cash fund CIP expenditures would likely be viewed very favorably by the capital markets and rating agencies. This would significantly reduce the city's general obligation debt, provide flexibility to cash fund future capital improvement projects beyond 2031, and we would be letting the voters determine whether or not they want to move forward on this. So those are, I think, some highlights that I wanted to pull out from the presentation, and thanks for your work in preparing this too.
We don't have any room to improve with S&P, but I would hope that the other rating agency, which does not have us rated at the top tier, would look favorably upon us if we did something like that. We would see.
Just a couple of thoughts here. There's a lot about this that I do like. I do like the emphasis on public safety. I think that's definitely something we need to look into. The concern is the $176 for the average family. And I know that if you're a property owner, that's balanced out, essentially zeroing that increase out. But I think about the families that are renters, and how much of a bite that's taking out of their budget. So if we move forward on this, I would like to explore a little more about For instance, making the homestead tax exemption permanent. That's something we have done in the past, but that would be for low-income seniors and whatnot. Potential rebates, if we could set up some sort of rebate for families who do get hit a little harder with this. Also, I don't know, I know it's late May, probably a little early to get on our legislative agenda at this point, but maybe if we could make it a point with the state legislature to allow us to take off the taxes on foods, that way we're not required to it. I had a little more giddy up in my step about this when, before I knew that the tax would still be on food. So that is something I think maybe we can discuss here as a body if we continue to move forward on this.
And I'd also be interested in lobbying the state to look at the sales tax exemption for food.
Thank you, Mark and Elizabeth. Really appreciate all your work. Mark, I may set up a time for us just to maybe go over it. I have some questions that I won't, drag everyone else down with, just so I can make sure that I get my knowledge level up. I like the idea. I think it's an interesting concept. My only concern, and I've said from the bench consistently, that I would never want a sales tax increase to fund operation of police and fire, right? And I know that's not what this is. This is for capital for police and fire. But I would want to see maybe some backup plan, contingency, I'm not sure what the word is, and you and I can have another conversation. What if we did have another recession and we capture less sales tax, meaning even for capital projects for police and fire could have to be delayed or halted? That's just a little bit of worry. I'm not saying we can't get through that. I would just want to see that. I worry as much about operations of our police and fire as I do our capital projects. So I'll get with you and we can have some further discussion.
I will address both those because those are both very good points, and I think it's in the material, but I didn't talk about it specifically. I would agree with you, using a dedicated sales tax to fund a specific operating purpose. I don't know that that would be the best idea because of exactly what you said. A lot of our operational costs go up consistently year over year, particularly ones with a lot of staff. Staff is 75% of our general fund, and I think you would be putting yourself in risk if you funded an ongoing operating cost with a revenue stream that we know has variability. But that is exactly why it is better suited, in my opinion, for more general fund as large purposes or specific capital improvements, because we could easily manage the cash flow needs on capital improvement projects over the up and downs of a sales tax. And in fact, we've been doing that for 40 years on Kellogg, for example. But that's one thing I would mention. I would also talk about limited term. A limited term, as I noted, is much better suited for capital improvement projects like the Intrust Bank Arena. It is not well suited for ongoing programs like a property tax relief program or a operating budget program. In fact, that would be a very bad sign probably to our rating agencies if we did something like that, because by definition it's going to expire at some point, which means our future would be somewhat perilous if we funded operating costs with a non-recurring source. But those are two nuances that I think are in the report, but I didn't mention, so I'm glad you brought that up.
I am supportive of going forward with this. As I've shared my concerns about our city budget, this is a potential solution. So I am supportive of going forward with the conversation and coming up with some more concrete things that would be funded.
Mark, I do,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I do have one question. So let's, I feel some energy that this is maybe a direction we should explore. But ultimately, it's our residents who make the decision. So do we build the 26 budget without this and just assuming it's status quo, and then we assume that this would happen in 27? Is that assumption correct?
I think you have to, because on July 15th, you will set the maximum levy in your taxing funds. Now, you can go down from that, but you can't go up, and then you will approve those levies on August 25th. Well, I mentioned the time frame for a referendum. It's likely not going to happen by August 25th, so you probably don't want to base your taxes levied for next year based on any presumption at all, which is to say the answer to your question is no, you probably don't want to base a 26 budget on any prospective sales tax.
And based on other communities, sometimes it takes them years to get the community educated on, I mean, so it could potentially not even be this November's referendum. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I wouldn't support anything until the voters actually vote for it. But I'm very interested in this. I would rather fund CIP projects through cash rather than borrowing. And I think it's a definite need. If anybody's gone through some of our firehouses and police stations, it is a huge need that we need to rebuild those and refurbish them because they're not in good shape. So I would be in favor of funding those. And also, we do need property tax relief. We do. People have been screaming about that. It's consistent. It's loud. We do need that. As far as lower income individuals, and we serve those individuals at Guadalupe Clinic every day, and they spend almost all of their income on rent and food. So eliminate that 1%, yes, that would be good. If we could lobby the state to do that, but they're not going to be affected by this very much. So they don't have a lot of disposable income. So I think this is a good strategy to fund projects with cash, number one. Number two, reduce property taxes, and it could give us additional revenue too, I think. And 20 to 30% of it's going to be paid by people outside of Wichita. I've said this for a long time, that the bedroom communities around Wichita, and I know some people who live here in those bedroom communities, but the Mays, the Goddard, the Valley Centers, the Andovers, the Hayesvilles, they all use our services. They all use our streets. They use our library. They use a lot of things that we have, our park systems, and they don't pay much for them. So it would capture some of that revenue from them also.
Mark, I would be interested in more information before I even make a decision, because the last time that we had a sales tax really was Interest Bank Arena, and that sunsetted. So one of the things that worked with that sales tax was there was something promised, money raised, and the project completed. So there was a success record. And I think that that's part of the reason why I think some of the council members mentioned they're okay with this, because it's a capital improvement project. So you see land, nothing there, you make a promise, there's gonna be a fire station, a police station, and then it gets built and it gets sunsetted. So I would like more information on if you can find, I think we had another question posed to this community after the Interest Bank Arena tax, but it failed. So I think we need a little bit more information on why it failed, what was promised back then that didn't meet what community wanted. Because I think that, again, when it comes to public safety, that is what community wants us to focus on. And I said it earlier, when they call Sedgwick County 911, they expect Sedgwick County EMS or Wichita Police or fire to arrive. So I really think that when it comes to things like this, if they go back to what our core services are, we can communicate about the need, but also a sunsetting of that specific tax.
Again, Mayor, I would agree with you. If the objective is to have a limited term, it's much better suited to exactly what you said, tangible, physical capital improvements.
I would just add a couple comments that we've seen the last two attempts at the school bond and the previous sales tax that failed. And personally, I believe that it didn't have good strategic campaigns. It all seemed very rushed. I feel like November is a little bit rushed, but I am interested in learning more. I just want to make sure that people have enough time to engage, get all the information that they need before they vote. And I would say, as a council, we need to have a clear understanding on how it would work, what it would fund, how it would fund it, and if it sunsets or not. And until the majority of us can agree, I don't think we should be moving forward. I want to make sure that we're all able to articulate well to the public, especially before we ask for their support. So, thank you.
question, Mark, regarding the mayor, and I think Councilman Ballard's question about sunsetting. Could a portion of the mill levy reduction be permanent to help with ratings, and then the CIP portion be sunsetted? So the mill levy reduction could go in perpetuity, and the CIP could be sunsetted?
That is a fantastic question, which I did not anticipate. So I do not know the answer, whether that be one referendum or two. It's probably something we'd have to take a look at.
Okay.
But I understand exactly what you're saying.
So it'd be one question. And then second question, this theoretically, if we brought it back before the public, and obviously more discussion is going to have to happen before we do that anyway, if we tie this to mill levy reduction as well, both the bond issues that failed recently did not tie that to a mill levy reduction, correct?
That's my understanding, yes, sir.
Thank you.
And I will say that Councilmember Ballard and the mayor's points are very good, because we've studied a lot of other cities. Oklahoma City is a fantastic city to study if you want to study sales tax, and they do exactly what you're suggesting. They have long runways of engagement. They find out what the community is interested, particularly in the capital improvement space, and then they issue referendums, and they do that consistently, continually, actually. And some pass and some fail, but they implement what is the will of the population. Think of the MAPS area downtown Oklahoma City.
Yeah, I've studied that and looked into it a little bit. I think it shows that it has been successful in other areas, and I think that it has the potential to be successful in Wichita. I just want to make sure that we're doing enough community engagement and asking for feedback, because these are essentially the people that will need to be supportive of it. So, thank you.
And just to follow up on that, we did a city-to-city tour to Oklahoma City several years ago through the chamber, and it's my understanding, and please anyone correct me if I'm wrong, but the city of Oklahoma does not lead the sales tax education campaign, right? It's done by a local grassroots coalition. So even if this is something that was our desire, that it would be a ballot initiative, to go on, and like I said, I don't even think it would happen in November 2025. It would probably take longer. But if that's something that the community felt was important, they would have to lead that initiative. The city of Wichita couldn't champion it.
Okay, well, thank you. I apologize. I think I went a little bit over my 15 minutes.
All right. So what happens next? This is an interesting way to start the week. Come back from a 3-day weekend. We're going to continue monitoring revenue data, and all these strategy alignments across divisions. We'll be working on that. And then also, we've been working on resident engagement. The budget simulator has been open since earlier this month. That'll be open through August. And so far, we've received quite a bit of engagement through that tool. And then also, we have more, I think preliminarily, there's some community engagement that's being considered for June. So your budget calendar. So in addition to, there will be a final budget workshop in June. We will share the assessed valuation at that time, and we will update the handout that we shared today based on the feedback that we've been getting. So that workshop's on the 24th. And then on the, it seems like a long time, but it goes very quickly. The budget will be presented on July 15th. And at that meeting, you will take, it's one agenda report, but you'll take action on the authorization to exceed the revenue neutral rate. So that is the thing that results in a form going to the Sedgwick County Clerk that says you're considering exceeding the revenue neutral rate. And also that time, the publication of notice is approved and the maximum taxes to be levied. So that sets the ceiling for taxes to be levied for 2026 on that day. And then we have a number of public hearings in addition to what's required of state statute. There's an evening one on August 7th. There's one on August 19th, which is really the last best time for people to provide feedback on the budget. And that's also when the simulator closes. And I say that's the last best time because it's really hard if people provide us feedback for the first time on the August 26th to turn around and include that in the budget that will be adopted by the City Council. Just a little bit on the simulator. So far, I think we've topped 200 people who've completed budgets. The feedback has been that it's really difficult to complete a budget, and none of these ideas are good ones. So it's kind of like the workshop. So, but just, it's a trick because people can go up and down on those high priority areas and just decrease on the lower priority areas. There's just generally speaking a lot of support for street maintenance and things that are associated with street maintenance and for parks. And so that's some feedback we've been getting so far. But yes, we're like, yeah, I'm a real popular person. So, so then on August 26th, in accordance with state statute, we have to adopt the budget between a certain dates. So that's when there'll be the public hearing, and then you will set the tax rate for next year and adopt the budget. So that's what's coming up next. Just what you'll see, what we'll be working on is, I think we'll confer on the feedback that you provided today regarding the tables of options and start incorporating some of the ones that, like the health insurance rates that there was consensus on, bring back more concepts next time and let you all know what we're seeing in the simulator and then what ESS valuation notice is. So there's a lot to be done. I'm really appreciative. I think we're all appreciative of your feedback and guidance and your attention. It's a long workshop, but it really does touch everything. So thank you.
Mayor, that's it.
Thank you again, Elizabeth and Mark, for the presentation. A reminder on that slide, August 7th is not a Tuesday, it's a Thursday. That is due to the elections that are happening for August 5th. And so that is the third nighttime meeting. The second nighttime meeting is actually next Tuesday. So next Tuesday, again, will not be at 9 a.m. So tune in or come to City Hall Tuesday, June 3rd at 6 p.m. Thank you.
Mayor, I will, just for those who are watching, our primary topic on the June 3rd will be a property maintenance code and revisions to our current property maintenance rules and regulations and ordinances.